Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Planning and Development Management Committee, another virtual meeting today, the 21st of October 2020. Before we get on to apologies, I just wanted to just have a quick point. I wonder if many of my eagle-eyed committee noticed the error, the small error on the agenda. And there's no prize for spotting it, but I would just like to draw your attention to the fact that the planning reference for the CTLR paper on the agenda is incorrect, that the numbers have been transposed. It is a small error, but I do think it's important to mention it. It should be 19/01837 and not 01387. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure that that was mentioned right up front. Okay, so do we have any apologies for the committee this morning?
No, conveners, no apologies received this morning.
That's lovely. Thank you, Danny. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the top table as I would normally do. So in the meeting today, we have Mr. Christian Smith, who's the Development Management and Building Standards Service Manager. We also have Mr. Jamie Scott, a team lead. My vice convener, Councillor Bob Braun. From the legal services, our legal manager, Mr. Jeff Fogg, and committee services, Mr. Danny Williams. Just a little bit of usual housekeeping. Members are reminded that if they leave the meeting during the consideration of any of the applications, that then means that they are unable to participate in the vote. That also means that unfortunately, if a member loses their internet connection during the consideration of any item, that they are not able to vote on that item. And if they could please advise the clerk via the meeting chat if they are leaving the meeting at any point or if they have lost connection, and then we can make sure that everything is above board. For the proceedings today, can I remind councillors and officers to use the chat box to attract my attention? I don't have a visual of everybody, so if anybody wants to attract my attention, could they please use the meeting chat box? The usual codes will be sufficient. If you want to ask a question, put in a Q. If you want to raise a comment, please put in a C. Point of order, PO, we're all aware of them now. So if I would now pass over to Mr. Williams, if he could then do a roll call of the members that are participating today and confirm their attendance. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, convener, and morning, everyone. So it's the usual procedure when I call your name out, if you just let me know whether you're present. Councillor Anderson?
Present.
Councillor Barnacle?
Present.
Councillor Braun?
Present.
Councillor Drysdale?
Present.
Councillor Gray?
Present.
Councillor Illingworth?
Present.
Councillor James?
Present.
Okay, we've heard from yourself, convener. Councillor Purvis?
Present.
Councillor Reid?
Present.
Councillor Waters?
Present.
Councillor Williamson?
Present.
And Councillor Wilson?
Present.
Okay, so that's for everyone here. Thank you very much for that, members.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so declarations of interest. So before we go into that section, if anyone does have any declarations of interest, I'd like to take a moment to address the committee on a point that has come to my attention and has been asked for some clarification. As you will be aware, the principle of the Cross-Tay Link Road has been considered at various meetings of the Council over the years, most obviously and recently, in relation to the form and content of the development plan, the Council's preference in respect to the alignment of the eastern end, and relation to the Council's capital plan and programme. Now, I wish to reassure members that their engagement in this earlier decision making in relation to the Cross-Tay Link Road does not preclude you from participating this morning. These other processes were concerned with matters of development planning, planning principles, and financing considerations. Today, we are required to assess whether the application of the CTLR is in accordance with or contrary to the current development plan, and to assess all other material considerations relating to the proposals. So I'd like to remind you, however, that it is the responsibility of each councillor to assess any public comments or statements that have been made regarding the Cross-Tay Link Road, pertaining to the voicing of an opinion, and I will leave the decision on that up to the discretion of each individual councillor. So having said all that, can I ask, are there any declarations of interest regarding the applications before us today? And if any members do have one, could they please put DI into the chat box for me now? Okay, I'm taking that there are no declarations of interest. So that brings us on to deputations. And can I ask the committee, are we in agreement to hear the deputations for item 5.1.2? Again, I will take silence as an agreement, but if anyone has any issues, could they please put that into the chat box now? Okay, thank you. In that case, we are happy to hear the deputations coming forward for 5.1.2. So that brings us on to the minutes of the Planning and Development Management Committee, the virtual meeting on the 23rd of September. Again, I will take silence as agreement, but if anyone has any points or any issues regarding the minutes of the previous meeting, could they please put a comment into the chat box now? If not, we will take it that they are happy with the minutes. And again, as there has been nothing brought forward, then I'm taking it that we are happy. So that brings us then on to the applications in front of us. And the first application is it's a major application, and it is for Bridge of Erne. It's erection of 159 dwelling houses with associated roads, drainage and landscaping at the land to the north of the A912 at Oudenarde, Bridge of Erne in Perthshire. And I would like to ask Mr. Scott to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. As you'll see from paragraphs 1 to 5 of the report, there's an extensive background to this application, but I'll just summarise briefly that this approval of MAR's specified in conditions application is for the exact same layout and design that was previously considered by committee in October 2017, where members resolved to approve the application. An updated recommendation to remove a condition was to be made at committee in January 2018. However, before being reconsidered by committee, Transport Scotland objected and the Scottish Government called the application in to determine. After an extensive process, an order to modify the existing planning permission in principle was promoted by the Council, and that was approved by the Scottish Government in July 2020. In August, the Scottish Government concluded the call-in process, so PKC are now able to determine the application. I'm going to take you through now some stills to clarify the site location and give some context to its characteristics and the nature of the proposal. This still shows the location of the application site with the M90 to the immediate west, that's left of shot, with Bridge of Erne beyond. The A912, which is the primary road, is to the south, from which the vehicular access will be taken. On all other boundaries to the application site is undeveloped land that forms part of the wider Oudenarde village that benefits from planning permission in principle. To the northwest, which is the upper centre part of the still, which is beyond the Perth-Edinburgh Railway, you'll see the completed part of the affordable housing development, which is phase 1 of the Oudenarde site. Some of these features will be explored in further detail in later photos. So I'm now going to take you to the next still, which is the proposed site plan. The red line marks the site boundary, with the site being phase 2A of the wider Oudenarde development. A section of the A912, including access roundabout, as well as areas of previously developed road network, are shown in the application boundary. But the development itself is within the core, within the coloured area that you see within the site. So from the existing road layout, 3 vehicular accesses are proposed within the residential development. The streets are designed to dissuade through traffic and encourage non-vehicular movements. This would be achieved through shared road surfaces, pedestrian pathways throughout the site, and 24 access points to path on all boundaries, including access to the area of open space and play area, which would be located to the east of the site. In time, these accesses would connect with areas in the later phases of development. A range of house types are proposed. In the northwest corner of the site, 22 3-bed bungalow units are located. In the remaining areas, 2-storey houses and a mixture of detached, semi-detached and terrace are proposed, ranging from 2 to 5 bedrooms in size. I'll now take you through a series of photographs taken from outside and within the site. This first photo is taken from the A912, from the eastern approach to the site and Bridge of Erne. The access off the roundabout is just visible in the centre left of shot. The southern boundary of the site is demarcated by the fencing visible to the right. In this area, new and replacement structural tree planting is proposed, with a shelter belt along the road frontage and a greenway woodland belt through the open space, which would be located to the right of shot. Looking closer now at the proposed vehicular access off the roundabout, which would be located where the vehicle is parked in the centre of shot. The development itself is located immediately beyond the security fencing and shrubs that are visible to the front and right of this vehicle. This next photo is located within the site boundary and at the access point, looking north up the internal access road, which, as advised, was previously built under an earlier planning permission. The developed affordable housing referred to earlier is just visible to the centre left of shot. The housing proposed in this application would be located to the right of this internal access road, with the first of 3 vehicular accesses proposed at this location. The proposed phasing arrangement for the remaining parts of Phase 2A, the next part of the development, would be located on the land to the west, so that's to the left of shot, followed by the land to the north, which is in the direction of the trees in the middle distance and towards the railway line. This last photo is taken from the internal access road to the north of the site, looking southeastward. It broadly shows the western and eastern extents of the site. To the east, which is left of shot, is the proposed location for the open space and play area, referred to earlier, which would extend down to the southern boundary of the site. The 2 remaining vehicular accesses are proposed in this area, and the landscape strategy proposes a mixture of boulevard tree planting and fronting along these site roads. Now moving back to the next still, which is the site layout plan again, and that concludes the stills for this item, convener.
Thank you very much indeed. And I also want to say thank you very much for providing in the report the additional information of previous reports and previous details. So I wanted to go on record to say thank you for that. Now I would like to open it up to committee members if they have any questions for officers. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. You're first with your question.
Thank you, convener. Yes, there has been plenty of time for people in Bridge of Erne and all over and the Community Council lately have voiced concerns and asked me to ask some of the following questions just for a bit more clarity. So I've actually got 4 questions here, 3 are from the Community Council alone. So will I just ask them singularly to officers?
Yes, I'm happy in this instance, Councillor Anderson, for you to ask the 4 questions. We don't seem to have a lot of questions coming forward on the chat box. We have a couple, but I'm happy for you to ask the 4. If you could do them individually, and then that will give officers a chance to respond. Thank you.
Yes, because they're on different topics. The traffic control for the M90 slip roads is going to be done through lights. There's a fear that there'll be impact on motorway traffic. Concerns that we might have traffic queuing on the M90 similar to we have at Broxden and Inverarmond. Can the officers confirm that this would be unlikely?
Yeah, I would imagine that would be Mr. Lachlan McLean who will be answering that. Lachlan, if you wouldn't mind coming forward with an answer, please.
Thank you, convener. Yes, microsimulation modelling has been undertaken of this area, and Transport Scotland are happy with the modelling that's been undertaken. It's likely it would be a MOVA system, which basically monitors the level of queuing on the slip road. So we wouldn't envisage that there would be queuing going back onto the M90 with such a system. So we hope that there wouldn't be queuing there, and it can be monitored and tweaked as time goes on.
Thank you very much for that. My second question concerns the drainage. There are fears that the impact of the houses coming on stream would impact the shared drainage system we have in Bridge of Erne, and which is overloaded in adverse weather conditions. Can we get comfort that the drainage for Oudenarde would not have any impact on Bridge of Erne Kintillo drainage systems?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Mr. Russell Stewart, could you answer that for me, please?
Sure, yep. The drainage system for Oudenarde in terms of surface water is separate. It will all go to the ponds to the north that are already constructed, and they're attenuated and discharged at the Greenfield runoff rate into the River Erne. So in terms of surface water, it is separate. I would have to ask Scottish Water in terms of the sewer and that's not the area that I look at.
Thank you. It's just a supplementary to that. Would the sewer from that leads from Cantillo Bridge of Erne, would that need to require upgrading to take the Oudenarde waste?
Sorry, can you repeat that question again?
Yes. So the actual sewerage, not the suds water, would be going into the same system as currently Cantillo Bridge of Erne have. Is there any idea if that requires upgrading?
I'm afraid in terms of the Scottish Water Network, they would assess that themselves with the modelling that they have on file, and only if they deemed it acceptable would they allow the development to proceed. So in terms of the sewer network, it's a matter that Scottish Water look into, not the council. So based on the fact that the application is going ahead, they will have assessed it and deemed it acceptable.
Yes, I also think, Mr. Scott, would you like to come in on that as well, please?
Yeah, just to supplement what Mr. Stewart said there, it's essentially they have planning permission already for the infrastructure, so that's the roads that I showed in the presentation and the underlying drainage networks, which the connections would be there. Any further changes or process to that, it would be subject of a separate consenting process with Scottish Water, but it's not my understanding they would have it would obviously impact connect to the wider network, but that would be very much for Scottish Water to look at.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand what that is. Now the third one, I'm not sure if anyone can really answer this, that there's concerns that we have, and I know from by personal experience, we have a very heavy blue clay in that area, and during dry periods it contracts and then it expands. There was concerns voiced about the foundations for new build in that area. Is there enough being done to mitigate against any cracking of foundations of new housing in that area?
Mr. Scott, I believe you can answer that. Also, we've had another couple of things. The speed of the chat box isn't quite working in speed of the way the conversation is going. I would also allow Mr. Peter Marshall to come in on the previous question in a moment. But if we could answer this question first, please, Mr. Scott, and then Mr. Smith, and then maybe Mr. Marshall could respond on the drainage concerns after that.
Yeah, I was going to clarify that the construction of the foundations would be a matter of the building warrant process through building standards, which I think Mr. Smith might want to speak to in more detail. Mr. Smith.
Yeah, that's correct. I was just going to clarify that that's not really a matter for the planning application and would be considered through the building warrant process.
Okay, and Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity, but it was a question, it was brought up at Community Council and I thought it was only my duty as a councillor to bring it forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Councillor Anderson, and I'm sorry, as I say, the chat's not moving at the same speed as the conversation, but I would like to give the opportunity to Mr. Peter Marshall to add to the previous question that you asked regarding drainage concerns. He might be able to add a little bit more to help with clarity on that. Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Convener. As Councillor Anderson will be well aware, the history of Oudenarde goes back to the early 2000s, and there was extensive discussions with Scottish Water, and a major upgrade was carried out mid 2000s to create the capacity for not just this development, but the whole 1600 house development for Oudenarde. So I think this is an issue that has been addressed some time ago.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Marshall. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, I believe you have one final question. That would be your 4. So
yes.
Over to you again.
Thank you. This is one that came up whilst I was seeing the presentation when it was mentioned that the roadway infrastructure throughout this would be of mixed. It's the surfacing I'm concerned about. Once this development has been taken over and adopted, will winter maintenance be able to undertake work on these surfaces that are planned for this development, because sometimes we have difficulty with certain surfaces for getting the roads cleared during the winter. So I thought I would just bring that up.
Oh, okay. Again, I'll pass over to Mr. Scott. I'm not sure that falls into a planning consideration, but I'll pass it over to Mr. Scott.
Thank you, convener, and thanks for the question, Councillor Anderson. Yeah, just to clarify, so on the still that's visible to you, the red dotted line around the road infrastructure that is already built and has planning permission already, those would be essentially primary roads within Oudenarde, and they would be fully adoptable standards and likely subject to winter maintenance. The reference to shared surfaces are actually internal within the site, so where the brown areas are shown on the site, they would be linkages between different accesses and residential areas within the site. So it's only those areas that would be subject to shared surfaces, and they might not be subject of street maintenance, but that would be a matter at the point of adoption for these roads as to whether they would or wouldn't. So that would go through the roads construction consenting process, and that'll take account of those factors at that point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for allowing me these 4 questions. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. We have questions from Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Barnacle. Councillor Wilson, sir.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the presentation. Like Councillor Anderson, I've got a number of questions. I'll keep them brief. The call-in process, which I've got to say, convener, was lengthy, resulted in deliberation about the installation of traffic lights. Could we maybe, and that's been mentioned before, but could maybe have a short summary of where these traffic lights are likely to be, and not just the consequences on motorway traffic, but on local network traffic? My understanding is they would be on the leading up to the slip road that's the leads north, if you like, principally, and would affect the sharp right hand turn that you make underneath the motorway to travel north. But my understanding is maybe not entirely correct. I'd like my first question is like a wee bit of detail on that, please.
Certainly. I will pass that over to Mr. McLean for his response.
Thank you, convener. Yes, Councillor Wilson, the plan is to have signals along the A912 at this at all the slip road junctions there. It's likely to be a mover system which will be able to monitor queuing levels and volumes of traffic, and what that then does is gives priority to the arm where there's queuing or where there's the highest demand, to try and better balance the traffic flows through the area, which should in effect result in lower levels of queuing on the slip roads and also on the local road network. It's all about trying to balance the queuing, and that's what the system will try and do. Okay, maybe convener, I could ask a supplementary. If that's the case, will the traffic light system allow adequate acceleration of traffic, which is going up a ramp basically to get onto the motorway, so that vehicles would have sufficient speed to join the motorway traffic safely in the normal way? Yes, it should do. In terms of at the moment, you may have to stop at the bottom of the slip anyway to turn right. So if you're coming from, say, Abernethy heading towards Perth, and you want to turn right up the M90 along the A912, you might have to stop already. So yes, you will have sufficient space to accelerate up. I don't envisage that being any different to the current arrangement that's there at the moment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Before you continue, Councillor Wilson, I do believe that Mr. Smith, Mr. Scott also has some comments. So if you would like to answer that, please.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, just to go on from what Mr. McLean was saying there, so the traffic lights that are being installed, but just want to draw members' attention to the modified planning permission in principle. There are 2 conditions that have been attached in effect through that modification to the planning permission in principle. So there's a 2-phase approach to the delivery of the upgrade to the road infrastructure. Condition 6 of the modified permission Essentially, there's a trigger there. So when we have 348 houses, that's when the new priority junctions with the traffic lights would kick in. So that's commensurate with the scale of development. And in terms of the M90 slip, at 848 houses, condition 7 would require an upgrading to that northbound merge. So because the scale of development increases over time, the two pieces of infrastructure will be adapted to make sure that the traffic flows would be addressed. So the traffic lights will be in place earlier and the upgrading to the slip road thereafter, which will make sure that there will be a free movement of traffic onto the motorway.
Thanks very much indeed, Convener. My other questions are related to transport in a way. We saw in the summary that there was permission for a bridge over the railway. I just want to make sure that this current development in no way inhibits the installation of that crossing, or indeed the possibility of having a rail halt or a rail station here at some time in the future.
Okay, Mr. Scott, could you answer that, please?
Yeah, certainly. No, it doesn't, Councillor Wilson. To clarify, there is an approved master plan and there is an updated master plan which we'd be recommending for approval as part of this development, because that was a requirement of the Section 75 legal agreement. So in effect, that railway bridge is required to be delivered at some point within the next phases of development, and there is also land identified and earmarked within that for a rail halt and park and ride facility. So it wouldn't prohibit the delivery of either of those two pieces of infrastructure.
Thank you. Just on the phasing of the railway bridge, because that will obviously have an effect on traffic flows, particularly along Clayton Road and associated streets. Could you be a bit more specific about what the phasing of the railway bridge is, Mr. Scott, please?
Yeah, straight to Mr. Scott there. Thank you.
Certainly. So within the phasing arrangement that they've proposed, that was something they needed to submit to us as part of this application. The bridge would either come at the end of this phase, which is residential phase 2A as it's put forward, but within the master plan it's site R1. So it'd either be part at the end of this process or at the end of the next phases of residential development, which is identified on the master plan as R21 and 22. So that's actually the land to the west that I referred to in my presentation on that access road. So it would be on the next phase of development that road bridge, sort of rail bridge, would likely come forward.
Thank you. Sticking with public transport, Convener, just for a moment, are there any proposals for public transport to serve this phase? I mean, there are buses from Abernethy and Newborough, as we know, and Glenfarg, Kinross, that travel along what I call the main road, the Begley Strait. Is there a provision for bus stops to be around? I missed that in the report. If I didn't see it properly, I apologise. But would there be provision for any public transport, bus-wise?
Certainly. Mr. McLean, could you answer that, please?
Yes, there'll be bus stops along the A912 to start with, and then what we can look at is with any potential phasing or demand, and we can potentially look at what other bus service provision may be required for the site.
Okay, thank you. My next question is regarding health services, Convener, and this has been a pretty major topic in Bridge of Erne, where there have been difficulties, I think, in providing GP services on a continuous basis. I've read what the report says, and it says there's no immediate comment from health authorities at this stage, but there's a cumulative effect of providing all of these additional houses, and I just wonder at what point there is in the master plan a health facility in a school. I'm well aware of that, but at what point does the system we've got creak more to the point where there needs to be a proactive involvement of the health authorities? And it could be just staffing, it could be reusing rooms within the existing facilities, but I think the growing population will make demands on the health service, or that, like education, will get pushed into demand in Perth City. So I wonder if we got any further comments on that, Convener.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, can I ask before, because there's both Mr. Scott and Mr. Marshall are happy to answer the question. Do you have many more questions, sir?
I've one more very quick
One more. That's fine. And if we could keep the questions brief to questions, that would be very helpful, because we do have a lot in front of us. If we could start with Mr. Marshall, and then if Mr. Scott needs to come in, then he can do. Mr. Marshall, could you answer the question, please, regarding health?
Yes, there has been provision in the master plan since the outset for a surgery. However, it requires the involvement of the health authorities in the operation of it. I am aware that the applicant has had discussions with the health board and offered to design and build a health centre if the health board wished to lease that. As far as I'm aware, these discussions have not gone forward. So I think it's fair to say that the onus is on the health board here to be proactive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Final one is just, and it's been mentioned before by Councillor Anderson, the clay soil and surface flooding. Are we content that the surface water drainage is taking full account of the clay soil in the area?
Yes, Mr. Stewart, could you answer that issue on drainage, please?
Yes, the design of the whole of Oudenarde, we've received modelling information on that, and no discharge goes into the ground. It's all taken through surface water drainage to the ponds to the north and then discharged at a controlled rate to the Erne. So yes, the clay soils have been taken into consideration with the design.
Okay. Convener, thank you very much for your forbearance, and to the officers for the very full answers. I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We now move on to Councillor Barnacle, and I believe Councillor Drysdale also has a question. And if I could remind councillors that we do have, I don't want to minimise the amount of questions. I'm more than happy for everybody to get a chance to ask as many questions as they like. But if we could keep them to questions, that would be very helpful. Councillor Barnacle.
Thanks, Convener. I have 3 questions, and they're all on the same subject, and that is flood risk. I note that SEPA and structures and flooding have no issues, and I'm really addressing paragraphs 65 to 68 of the report. I thought I was right in thinking that the Erne is a floodplain and Bridge of Erne and Oudenarde are well within that. So that leads me to 3 questions. Paragraph 65 talks about the 200-year return period and a 20% adjustment for climate change. So are we content this is adequate given recent experiences of flooding? That's question 1.
If we could continue, Councillor Barnacle, to take them one at a time, I think that just makes it a little bit easier for officers. So, Mr. Stewart, I think that would come back to you again. Are we happy that they're adequate?
Yes, yeah, and indeed, yeah, the SEPA flood map show the flood extents, and the Oudenarde development itself, where the houses are proposed, are out with that. So there's no issue there.
Thank you. Should flooding occur, however, would the council be liable for any damage if we had granted permission through the local plan process? That's a question, I suppose, for Jeff Fogg.
Yes, Mr. Fogg, if you wouldn't mind answering that question, if you could unmute and come forward with any insight on that, please.
Yes, my view is that the council would not have liability if there was a flooding event merely because it was a zone site and planning consent was granted. That of itself is not sufficient to cause the planning authority to have a liability.
Thanks, Jeff. Final question. Did the planning department discuss with the developers whether, given it's a floodplain area, living accommodation on the first floor could be limited to garages, stores, workshops, sorry, the living accommodation, could that be on the first floor rather than the ground floor in terms of design of the houses? This is done elsewhere, and I just wondered if that had been thought about.
Thank you, Councillor Barnacle. Mr. Scott, if you could answer that, please.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you for the question, Councillor Barnacle. Just to clarify, as my colleague Mr. Stewart has clarified, the site is not in an area of recorded flood risk for fluvial risk of flooding from the river. There is a small risk of surface water flooding which has been accounted for within the drainage strategy that's been prepared. Considering those matters together, the site is free from flood constraints, so there wouldn't be any necessity to have any change in terms of layout and design of the housing. So in a sense, we've considered the application that's presented before us, which is of a typical bungalow and two-storey properties, so that was not considered with the developers.
Okay, thanks very much. That addresses my concerns, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Barnacle. Councillor Drysdale, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Convener, and I'm sorry to say I have a miserable one question to ask, and I'll be very brief.
Thank you for that.
Which is just coming back to the previous discussions on the traffic lights, etc., at the junctions. I assume this is I know the answer to this, but I just wanted to put it on record. When you're coming off the motorway and there is a traffic light at the foot of the slipway, I'm assuming that the default position, if there were to be a traffic light failure, would not be a red light there. I'm just concerned that that there may be queuing traffic onto the motorway if traffic lights failed.
Thank you. Over to you, Mr. McLean, for that, please.
I mean, thank you, Convener. If the traffic signals were to fail, there would be a default situation where they would either switch off or they can be monitored remotely so that they can go into a fixed time cycle phase. So there will be some sort of safety mechanism in there to prevent queuing going back onto the motorway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, I will ask the question if there are any further questions for officers before we proceed on to the next part. Okay, there are no more there are no more questions, so I would like to move the paper. I have listened to I'm sorry, I was just going to move the paper there, Councillor Anderson. If you're wanting to second, or if you're going to second, okay. I was wanting to move the paper in accordance with the result and the information provided. This development has been a long time coming, and as much as we have to be certain and sure that all the drainage issues and possible traffic issues and various other sensible questions that have all been asked this morning are addressed, I think it is very important that this is moves forward, and I am happy to move the paper. Councillor Anderson, you wish to second?
Yes, very happy to second this. We have been around the houses quite a lot with this development, and as I said, everybody's had a chance to look closely at it and scrutinise it well. I think this is long awaited, and it will kickstart the Oudenarde project properly. The rail bridge phasing, I would imagine, wouldn't go. I hope that people in the social housing are well aware that it probably won't go on the completion of this phase, but after this phase there'll be another, the second phase, and once they have the houses built out in that, I'm sure that we will, once that happens, we will have the rail bridge, which will link in the terrible position the people in the social housing have of always being cut off when there's adverse weather. So we badly need that rail halt, and the only way to do that is to get the private housing element built out. So I'm quite happy to second that. I hope that it accelerates the rail halt, and also look at bus provision for both sides of Woodland. So quite happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do we have an amendment or do we have any comments? We have a comment from Councillor Wilson. I'm also not seeing that there is any amendments to this, so we'll go straight to comments. Councillor Wilson, over to you.
Thanks, Convener. It's no amendment. It's supportive of the motion and the seconding, very much so. And I'm pleased to see this going ahead. It has been a very, very extended period of time. And this, as Councillor Anderson has correctly said, this shows good progress. And the sooner we can get the rail bridge in, and the sooner we can get hopefully the rail halt installed, the better. I am regretful that I did refer to this in my questions, Convener. Perhaps not, I should have kept it for the comments. But 2.5 years to decide on some perfectly sensible issues about traffic lights, if that's what the solution was, seems to be an inordinately long time. And I'm regretful that the whole scheme has been held up because of that. And I would hope that if there are any more interventions by Transport Scotland, the Scottish Government, the reporters, that they deal more expeditiously with them than on this occasion. There may well have been technical reasons for that. That's not in the report. We haven't had any explanation about that. But it's good to see the private housing going ahead. And the sooner that rail bridge gets put in and the problems with traffic and flooding in Clayton Road and roundabout are resolved, as Councillor Anderson has referred to. I used to work at Bridgeverne Hospital, so I know these issues intimately in the old days, and the sooner they get resolved, the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, any further comments? No further comments. So in that case, the application is approved, and we will be able to move on to the next item of business in front of us today. Okay, now I just wanted to mention that I fully intend to take a comfort break at some point. I think as we've only been in for just over 40 minutes, I'm not going to do it at the moment, but I'll take a view on how the next application goes, and I will allow a comfort break at some point. Okay, the next application in front of us is a formation of the Cross Tay Link Road, or CTLR, and associated works on the A9 over the River Tay to the A93 and A94 north of Scone. Just as a sideline, I would like to remind the committee that it is not in our remit to assess any alternative scheme, and that we are only to determine the application that is before us. And I would like to ask Mr. Smith to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. So firstly, as many of us here today will appreciate and have heard, there's a long background to this project with many of the non-planning issues already set out, considered, and decisions taken at other meetings of the council. And today we're here to consider the planning merits associated to the detailed scheme rather than some of those other matters. So this presentation will see me firstly give you a summary of the proposals before going through a series of illustrative and informative slides, simply intended to outline the proposals at a high level. So firstly, a summary. The application itself, as was heard, relates to a road construction project we all know as the Cross Tay Link Road, or CTLR. The proposed road is some 6 kilometres in length and extends from a new junction with a realigned A9 in the west, then travelling east across a bridge over the River Tay and Highland Main Line Railway, connecting then with the A93 and finally the A94 north of Scone. On the east side of the Tay, there will be 4 new roundabouts at Stormontfield Road, the A93, Highfield or Scone North, and the A94. Also forming part of the scheme are a continuous 3-metre wide shared cycle pedestrian path along, but segregated from the southern side of the CTLR, and a green bridge at Highfield Plantation, enhancing biodiversity connections across the road. The project itself is the second of 4 within the Perth Transport Futures project, or PTFP, following on from the A985 junction improvement and link road to Bertha Park. Particularly, the CTLR seeks to improve access both locally and regionally by various means of travel, allowing economic growth, reducing traffic congestion in and around Perth, allowing for more sustainable travel options, and to help improve air quality in the air quality management area, encapsulating Perth. The local development plan sees the CTLR as a strategically important project critical to the delivery of the LDP2 objectives, with the capacity of roads infrastructure Perth's single biggest constraint. An EIA report and pre-application consultation report form part of a suite of documents which support the application. The report before you today sets out the way in which the application has been considered by officers and the recommendation which has been reached, following careful consideration of the terms of the development plan and all other material planning factors. So I now propose to take you through a series of slides which seek to illustrate the basic physical elements and planning considerations of the projects. So moving to the first slide. Here we see a satellite image with the extent of the site overlaid in red. You will note visual features including the River Tay running north to south in the left side, with the section of the site associated to the realignment of the A9 adjacent, and Lunkerty to its north and Inveralmond to its south. Then we move through to Scone in the bottom right part of the image, so just some visual references there. The next slide. This is the same, but this time on an OS base map and with the roads infrastructure proposed set out within the red line. This next slide shows the extent of the Perth Greenbelt in green and how the CTLR is positioned in relation to it, and giving some context. The next slide, we see an image which indicates how the proposal interacts with the complex framework of natural and cultural designations which have guided the routing, whilst also accounting for a multitude of other considerations. The next image is an extract from LDP2, which identifies the route of the CTLR, which is the purple line from the top right, and its relationship with other plan designations. We then move to a slide which is a further extract from LTP2, showing the relationship of the route with the strategic housing development site known as H29 or North Scone. Then the next images attempt to give an appreciation of how some of the built elements may appear. And firstly, we see here an aerial impression from the north of the grade separated junction and associated roundabouts and flyover at the intersection with the realigned A9. Then we have an impression of the bridge crossing the Tay. Next, we see a drawing which shows how the proposed bridge deals with the topography either side of the Tay. We then move to a drawing showing, if we move to the next slide, get there eventually. We move to a drawing showing the green bridge at Highfield, and then we follow that with an aerial impression of that green bridge, and then a view from the shared cycle pedestrian path looking towards, again, the green bridge. The final image sees the new roundabout at the A94 at the far east of the route and between Scone and Perth Airport. We then move to the OS base map again, concluding the presentation. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for that presentation. We now move on to deputations. We have a few deputations, and I just wanted to state up front, I mean, I will mention this at every point, but all the phones have been asked to be muted for anyone phoning in. So anyone, to be able to speak, you're going to have to unmute yourself, and to do that it is a *6, and that will allow you to unmute yourself when you're ready to give your presentation. Okay, so the first presentation is from Councillor Stewart. Councillor Stewart, are you on the phone?
Yeah, I'm just in. If you could just give me 1 second, convener, just to close the other meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, you're actually included in the meeting on a visual. In the past and for this, could we possibly ask that you switch off your video link? That way that all the deputations will be seen in exactly the same way. It will all be audible rather than audible and visible, and then that way there is no disparity between any of the deputations that are given, whether it be for or an objection to the application.
Sure.
Thank you. Also, the timing of this, I pass it over to the Vice Convener. So I will pass it over to the Vice Convener, Councillor Braun, who will go through the timing of it, and he'll do the timing. So thank you.
Good morning, Councillor Stewart. I'm sure you can hear me.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. You have, as usual, your 5 minutes. At the end of 4 minutes, I will give you a warning. I'll interrupt you as politely as I can to say that you have 1 minute left to speak. If you're happy with that, if that's okay with you, I will start the clock when I next hear your voice.
Okay, thank you, Convener, Vice Convener and members of the committee for agreeing to hear me on this ward-related matter today. There are a number of aspects of this planning application where I have concerns that the Council as a planning authority were to grant permission today could be placing itself in a position of risk. So I want to talk about flooding, I want to talk about habitat and endangered species, about ancient woodland, and chiefly about public health matters. In terms of flooding, the proposal is going to involve the removal of several areas of specifically ancient woodland, but trees on an area called Highfield, which is above spout wells in Scone. The risk here, as identified in some of the comments that have been made on the planning application, is of cutting into an aquifer. And when you do that, combined with when you do that and access the groundwater level, in addition to the surface water that regularly happens and flows down and is halted in Highfield area before getting into the aquifer around spout wells, there is a risk of flooding. I recognise that there are SUDS provision in the scheme, but I think this is still a concern. In terms of habitat and endangered species, there are a number of endangered species identified in the application that would have their habitat affected, and I'm concerned that the Council is endangering those habitats without properly investigating alternatives. Similarly, with an ancient woodland, the comments submitted on the application, even internally from the Council, recognise that the loss of ancient woodland in the Highfield area is irreversible, that the ancient woodland is irreplaceable, and while we would be proposing to move to provide compensatory planting, compensatory planting of new woodland is not the same as making as removing what is described, as I say, as irreplaceable ancient woodland. The Council here also has a duty to make sure that removal of ancient woodland is unavoidable, but I don't believe that the particular planning application before you today is actually the removal of ancient woodland is actually unavoidable. The main thing I want to talk about is health. We know that the chief reason, or one of the reasons given for the Crosstay Link Road is to address congestion and air quality issues, particularly for residents of Bridgend and Athol Street in the city centre. Sorry, air quality issues, particularly for residents of Bridgend and Athol Street in the city centre, and more widely congestion issues in Bridgend and across the city centre. It is, however, worth noting that in the capital budget that we considered just at the end of last month, and certainly from June 2018 when it was inserted, there is £100,000 available in the capital budget for air quality improvement initiatives, which were to be specifically targeted at Bridgend and Athol Street, but no proposals have yet been brought forward for implementing for spending that money to implement any such air quality improvement initiatives.
You have 1 minute.
Oh, right, okay. My other concerns about health are for the future residents of Scone North, and also NHS Tayside Public Health warned about this in June last year, but their comments weren't circulated as requested to members of council when the route was under consideration. And again, as an objection, I don't think it could really just be described as a comment, as paragraph 38 of the report does. In response to this application, NHS Tayside Public Health again warned about the effect of noise, vibration, air quality on the future residents of the Scone North site. But those effects, noise, vibration and air quality, will also have implications for Gilton on the A93 and for villages north on the A94, who will experience a 12% increase in traffic just in the first year of operation of the Cross-Tay Link Road. The only mitigation proposed is...
Could you now start the wind up, please?
Sure, will do. Last paragraph, I think. So in terms of our legal and best value and climate change duties as a council, to consider public health is chief amongst those, and to build it into our decision making. If harm comes to people from the Cross-Tay Link Road application before you today, then it doesn't really legally matter whether the harm comes to the people, the installation of the Cross-Tay Link Road, or whether people come to the harm moving into Scone North after the construction of the Cross-Tay Link Road. Then my understanding is that the council would still be liable. I think we have a duty, as members of the committee have a duty to consider these serious legal matters today.
Thank you very much. Back to you, convener.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Councillor Stewart, for your deputation. Are you happy to excuse me, are you happy for the committee to question you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. So I will open it up to questions for Councillor Stewart on the information that he has provided. So if we have any questions from the committee, could you please put a queue in the meeting chat? Okay, we have no questions. You've got off lightly there, Councillor Stewart. No questions from committee. So thank you very much indeed for your deputation. And that allows us to move on to the second deputation. Again, I'll repeat myself, but if you're on the telephone, you'll need to *6 to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. And the second deputation is from Mr. McKerracher and Ms. Belch from Scone and District Community Council. Are you there?
Hello.
You are. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for coming and attending today.
Yes, good morning. Thank you.
No problem. I will pass it on to the Vice Convener, Councillor Braun. He'll go through the timing process with you, and then we'll happily hear your deputation. Thank you.
We
have two deputations. Which one would you like to have first?
It's entirely up to yourself as to which way around you wish to go. The two deputations have to come to a total of the 5 minutes added together. So however you want to do that would be fine, if you could just let us know.
Okay, we were actually told that we would have 5 minutes each.
No, I'm a very sort of strict convener, and I play this by the regulation all the way through. The community council gets 5 minutes, and as such, anybody wanting to speak, there could be 5 people a minute each, or you could work it out amongst yourselves. But the 5 minutes is for the community council, so it'd be between yourselves to decide. I'm happy to give you a moment to decide that if you wish.
Okay. Donald, could I go first, and I will be very quick.
You go first, Joel. It's not a problem.
Right. Okay. Sorry about that.
Before you start, could I just give you the timing rules? You have 5 minutes between you, as you've been told. I will interrupt you as politely as I can after 4 minutes to give you a warning that you have 1 minute left. If you're happy with that between you, I will start when I hear the first voice next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to us. Of those villagers polled in Scone, the overwhelming result was a request to move the CTLR. Council officers say the route decision has been made. However, since June 29, further compelling evidence has come to light, suggesting that this current application should be rejected to allow the route to be looked at again. In the light of earlier comments, remember, Scottish law says that air pollution is a material consideration which can change an LDP. Firstly, Dr. Jackie Hyland in 2018 did not know that the road was going through the development, in contrast to what the council were told in 2019. But very damning is the formal objection to this current application from NHS Tayside. It says, there are significant concerns about the negative health impacts of exposure to poor air quality for those living too close to the CTLR. WHO says to avoid building major roads through communities. It continues, air pollution disperses up to 500 metres from source. This will have a significant impact on those living near the CTLR. Children are at particular risk because they spend time outdoors, inhaling more pollutants because they're exercising and because of their greater lung surface area for body size. In addition, children's lungs are still growing and more vulnerable to pollution. And this health risk crosses the whole age spectrum. Regarding noise, the council officer's own papers show that 1/3 of H29 will experience decibel levels above WHO recommendations, and the 70+ houses along the CTLR will be unbearably affected. He then says the road will bisect the community, and this is a significant issue and concern, he says. The Social Exclusion Unit report highlights if a busy road cuts through an area, it drives a wedge through the community, limits people's ability to access key services. This damages community cohesion. He says community severance will occur as a result of the CTLR. He then says NHS Taysides have concerns over reporting bias. The considerable anxiety local communities expressed is one of the prominent findings not adequately presented in the main body of the report. NHS Tayside does not feel the current application is satisfactory in reporting or addressing the concerns of a number of different communities. We feel sure the committee cannot ignore this official NHS Tayside stance that this route will damage health. Remember, air pollution is a material consideration which can change an LDP. At our last meeting with council officers, the CC was told that the two routes were essentially the same, but it was the extra 5 million cost that turned the balance. But this merely means that instead of repaying the loan at 3 million per annum for 50 years, the council will repay it in 51.5 years. We see this amount was given to increase the City Hall budget. It's not a lot. For the sake of an extra 1.5 year repayment, we beg you to listen to your health board regarding the hugely damaging effects of this current road placement and reject his current application to reassess the route. Thank you.
If I could perhaps follow on from that, then, and I'm facing an objection on behalf of the residents of Stormontfield, which lies within the district, part of Scone District Community Council. We've got grave concerns about the proposed stopping up of the Stormontfield Road, as noted in paragraph 86 of the report before you. Stormontfield is a community of approximately 50 houses with no shops, church, school or bus services, and accesses facilities residents required to travel to Scone Bridge End of Perth, currently travelling along Stormontfield Road, which joins A93 Old Scone. The proposal before you today includes the construction of a roundabout on Stormontfield Road and incorporates the proposal to construct approximately 650 metres of Stormontfield Road from that roundabout up to form a new access for visitors to Scone Palace.
You have 1 minute.
The proposal is then to close off the existing road only 240 metres short of the A93. This will mean residents travelling a distance 1.44 miles each trip in perpetuity, and as a community, this will amount to annually over 86,000 miles, with its consequential effect in both monetary and environmental terms. Also in paragraph 86, no mention is made of the use of that we've been told they intend to use it for attending event at the Palace or the racecourse. We're informed that the stopping up order is required because of the geometry of the junction. We'd refute this since the visibility from Stormontfield Road is considerably greater than that from the Scone Brae, which is located across the road. Utilising your own information, it's still anticipated that following the completion of the CTLR, there'll still be 1,800 vehicles a day using the Scone Brae. Despite the request for information, this is to demonstrate the geometric problem or provide details of any proposed engineering solution.
Could you start to wind up, please?
While safety is promoted as reasons for closure, it appears the safety aspects of pedestrians sharing the roadway for the event traffic appears to be totally overlooked. We therefore request that the stopping up proposal is deleted and any grant of consent for the overall project contains a condition requiring the design of Stormfield Road to be completed to the A93 to ensure safe access for both residents and pedestrians who may be attending events at the Palace. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. Can I pass you back to the convener? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braun, and thank you very much, both of you, for the deputations. I just wanted to double check something and mention it. It's been going on in the background a little bit. I wanted to just double check that the letter sent to the Community Council Secretary did state that it would be a total of 5 minutes, and we've had confirmation. So I'm not sure where the breakdown came from, but the letter that was sent to the Secretary of the Community Council did state that it would be a 5 minutes for the Schoonan District Community Council. So I just wanted to put that on the record. I'm just sorry.
Thank you. We got an email saying, we got individual emails saying 5 minutes, so that's where the misunderstanding is.
So
apologies for that.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Hopefully you are happy to answer some questions. We do have Councillor Gray, who is willing to or has a question for you. So hopefully you're happy with that. Councillor Gray, can I pass it over to you, sir, for your questions, please? Need to unmute. Thank you.
Sorry, did you hear any of that?
No, unfortunately not, Councillor Gray. If you wouldn't mind starting again, that would be fine. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Ms. Belch and Mr. McCarricker. Mr. McCarricker, you raised concerns regarding the Stormfield Road and the shutting off of the lower end of it. That's 250 metres. Could you tell me how many households actually use this for the purposes of driving to and from Scone?
Yes, there are 50 households within the community, and as I said, because of the lack of facilities within Stormfield, all houses required to access Scone and Perth for services.
Now, could you add to that the route you take when you travel to and from Scone currently?
We travel up the Stormfield Road and up Scoonbury into Scone itself.
So that's you turn right on the A93
and then left up Scoonbury. That's correct, yes.
Right, okay. Right, thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Wilson, you have a question or questions?
Thank you, a couple at least. Convener, thank you. And just to follow on, thanks for your presentation. First of all, just keeping on with the Walkmill Stormfield Road, the U87, and I've got an old-fashioned OS map here that helps me a wee bit with my question, Convener. Currently, I know the route that you've described. So the cut-off point would be, given the proposals that are there, if the road was stopped up, would be near where you go into the racecourse. Am I right in thinking that?
No, that's totally incorrect. It's past the racecourse, past the events access, right up to a place that's known as Barkstack Gate, which is a new entrance, or it's an existing entrance, but it looks as though it's going to be improved into Scone Palace. Okay, so I thank you for that correction, because that's clarified things in my mind. And I think you said a distance of how many metres from the A93? Well, from the roundabout up to the new gate, they're proposing to reconstruct 650 metres, which only leaves it 240 metres short of the A93. In other words, 3/4 of the section will be upgraded as part of the current plans, and 1/4 will be closed off. And just if I can follow on with that, if that road was stopped off, you've I think you said a mile and a bit to travel extra both ways. Correct. Correct. And what you would need to go onto the CTLR and then off again. Have I got that right? Onto the CTLR, travel up to the A93 roundabout, and then travel back along the A93 to reach Old Scone. Right. Okay. So that would be the extra distance that you would take. Yes, that's correct. I mean,
presumably there are journeys to Perth and Blairgowrie as well, to Scone for shopping.
There are indeed journeys to Perth, but don't forget, it's the part of Perth that a lot of people are going to is the Bridgend and High Street area, which is a direct access in from Old Scone. The new road would involve us either going out and back along the E93, or else coming across and coming in by Inverarmount, which is a long way around to get into the High Street or Bridgend area of Perth.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I was wondering if officers could assist with this line of questioning by putting up the OS base map, if that's at all possible. I know it means we've got a little bit of work. There we go. That might just help to give a visual to some of the questions that are being asked. I know the people on the phone can't necessarily see it, but that might help some of the questions coming from councillors. Thank you.
Thanks,
Councillor Wilson, please continue.
Convener, if you want to pass the magnifying glass, that'll be even a greater help. My second question relates to the points raised in health terms by Professor Belch, which we've heard some of before, but useful to have that raised again. Is Professor Belch aware of any studies that have been done on the effect of traffic through Scone at the moment, through the actual village? And I wonder what comments she's got to make on the points of mitigation in the report that regarding distance of any future planning application, Convener, that would be for the housing site itself.
Yes, thank you. I can certainly comment. We did some tube studies of pollution going through the centre of Scone, and at the traffic cars are stopping, the levels were significantly above legal limits. I know the council did their own measures, but they didn't do it at the junction, and the flower pot, the hanging basket, was actually placed beside it. So there is already, we think, a problem with the cars coming through, and of course they will now be diverted through another place, houses where people will live. The document that assesses pollution says that the increase will be trivial, but it's trivial at 20% because all it says is that the houses will increase pollution by 20%. But because we don't know it, nobody could measure the baseline, so we don't know whether it's 20% above legal limits or what it is. Now, if you are diverting traffic that we know already causes pollution at Bridgend, then why would we not expect this traffic to cause pollution in a different direction? I think it's very important to note NHS Taysite's comment about the dispersion of particles being 500 metres, and also the fact that a school is proposed along the route of the CTLR. I think that I would say these details very much support looking at air pollution as a means of changing the LDP.
Okay, thank you very much for your response. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Braun, you have a question?
I do indeed, thank you, Convener, and it's a follow-on from Councillor Wilson, really, to do with the question of pollution. And I come back to this point that obviously it seems in all the Deputation we're talking about moving, for example, moving the pollution from Bridgend into Scone. And I come back to this point that we know that vehicular traffic is changing. Electric hybrid cars are now coming into the norm. Obviously, your figures work on the existing situation. Should we not be allowing for the fact that these changes are happening? I appreciate it's slow. I appreciate they won't be in place if this was to go ahead by the time it's finished, but changes are ongoing and every change reduces air pollution, and I just feel that that should be a factor taken into account.
I think that's correct, and what you're talking about is NOx, the nitric oxides, and they will reduce with electric vehicles. But as you probably know, electrification of lorries is estimated to be at least 50 years away, and your own pictures show very huge lorries going through. But what people don't understand is that particulate matter does not just come from fuel, and in fact very little of it comes from fuel, and the majority comes from tyres and from brake pads. And because people will be reducing their speed from 60 miles an hour to 50 to 30 to 20 at a school and then back to 50, particulate matter will be particularly high. So whilst I completely understand that a lot of people's understanding is that electric vehicles will resolve all our problems, this is absolutely not the case.
Could I just have a quick supplementary there, Convener?
Certainly.
Yeah, we're talking about that's the point. I drive a hybrid myself, but I'm been looking this up. Regenerative braking reduces braking particulates, as I understand.
That's right. But that is because you don't use the brake pedals. But not all cars, mainly the hybrids, have regenerative braking, and very few of the other models do. And in fact, it comes from the tyres. And I can, if it is of interest to you, I can send you quite a few learned documents showing that actually electric cars great because of the NOx, but actually particulate matter is just as profound.
Fine. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for convener.
Thank you. Councillor Purvis, your question, please.
Thank you, and thank you both for your presentations as well. My question is for Professor Belch. We've had the questions on the air pollution and the noise pollution. I was just wondering, you mentioned very briefly about concerns about bisection of communities and the effect that would have. I'm just wondering if you could give more detail on that, because it was very brief, the point that you had made.
Yes, there is a social exclusion unit in the Scottish Government, and they have made a report highlighting that if a busy road cuts an area, it drives a significant wedge through the community. And it says that it limits access to key services such as employment, education and health, and it uses the term damaging community cohesion. It also stresses that this always affects the most disadvantaged, and you will know that it is the joined up detached flat type buildings that are proposed to be built right alongside the CTLR, which we assume will be the for less well off. And so yet again the disadvantaged will be suffering. And the recommendation from the Social Exclusion Unit, which has been adopted, the paper has been adopted by the Scottish Government, says that because this is increasingly recognised as a significant issue in terms of safety, health and well-being, that this should be avoided. And again, I can provide those papers if that is required.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have Councillor Barnacle, but I was waiting to ask just a question myself. So Councillor Barnacle, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to come in because because the Ms. Belch, your comments there to Councillor Purvis and your answer to the question are stating on the proposed idea of the plans that are coming forward. But I would like to sort of follow that on and ask the question that when the plans actually do come forward for any housing or schools or community areas in that area, they will then be assessed by the planning department and will have to meet the placemaking standards that apply. And that includes pollution, and that includes community, and that includes all of the relevant placemaking standards that we have within the area. And if they don't meet those standards, then we will be looking at an application that would either have to change or be refused. Would you agree that we still have a process to go on any development that is happening if we were minded to go ahead with the Crosstail Link Road?
I think the developer can be made to put in noise protection elements into the houses. But what about walking outside? And as I've already explained, the children play outside and it's their developing lungs that are at risk. And you can't protect against pollution, which will travel 200, 300 meters. And, you know, if the developer is told he can't build the houses along the CTLR, that is even worse in terms of bisecting the community. So isn't it just simpler to say we would like to have these 700 houses? We're probably not going to be able to have them because of CTLR. If people stick to the rules, they'll probably only be able to have 300 or 400. Surely if we want the 700, we move the road so
well,
that these problems don't occur.
I would then say that that would be a concern that the developer would be bringing forward to us, which they're not. But anyway, I will pass you now on to Councillor Barnacle, who has a question. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, convener. I've always had concerns about the actual route of this, but the principle of a bypass around Perth, I think, is a good one. could you, it's 2 points really. First of all, when we were discussing the local development plans, did Scone Community Council object at that stage to the concept of the line of the Crosstail Link Road? That's the first question. The second question, I note that 3 CCs have objected, which is significant, but obviously you can only speak for Scone, but presumably if there was an alternative route to the north, which I know is not this application, that had less effect on the green belt and the ancient woodland, and in actual fact completed the bypass to the Dundee Perth Road, which probably in engineering terms is really difficult, you would be content. Is that correct?
That's correct. Our remit from the village is to ask that the route be removed and pushed higher, and the village approve a bypass. They think it's a good idea, but they don't understand why a bypass is scheduled to go through their village.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for not only for your presentation, but for so succinctly and detailed answers to those questions. So thank you very much indeed. And now we are going to move on to the next deputation. The next deputation is a Mr. Paul Freeman, from Cooper Angus Community Council. Again, I just have to state that for us to be able to hear you, if you've been muted, you need to *6 to unmute yourself. And can I ask Mr. Paul Freeman, are you there?
I have done that.
That's lovely. We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, as with everybody else, I'll pass you on to the Vice Convener, Councillor Braun, who will go through the timing of the deputation with you, and then it'll come back to me. Thank you very much indeed.
Good morning, Mr. Paul Freeman. I hope you can hear me.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, you'll have 5 minutes as everyone else has. Again, I will interrupt you as politely as possible at the 4-minute mark to warn you there's a minute left to go. If you're happy with that, I will start the clock as soon as I hear you next talk.
That's fine. Thank you very much for offering me the chance to make a few comments about the Crosstail Link Road. There are 2 areas affecting our community council's thinking. The first relates to potentially increased traffic in the villages of Balbeggie, Burlton, Cooper Angus and Meagle. The second relates to the climate emergency that was declared by the Scottish Government in May 2019 and the interim Perth Kinross Climate Action Plan that was launched in December of the same year. So how will the CTLR affect the villages of Strathmore, and how will it match up to the ideals in the Scottish Government and PKC climate emergency documents? These 2 things are linked in Cooper Angus, as we have applied to the Scottish Government to become a climate action hub. The PKC modelling says the CTLR will not increase vehicular traffic numbers significantly in the short term. Leaving aside the current concerns about modelling in other fields of operation, I assume that the CTLR research considered the induced traffic issue. Better roads inevitably mean more car journeys. No problem for Perth, of course, but what about the towns and villages of Strathmore, which will be affected? Is the road really necessary? We've already been listening to issues about the air quality at Bridge End. The CTLR was first proposed over 20 years ago at a time when diesel cars were popular and electric cars are just a dream in the future. Over the last 20 years, technology has advanced and will do so again over the next decade or 2. The inevitable and predictable increase in the number of electric vehicles will have some influence on air quality issues, I feel sure. I note the comments of Professor Belch, but perhaps we need to have an analysis of what the particular air quality issues are at Bridge End and whether the production of a different type of car will actually overcome them or not. The CTLR will remove traffic from the Perth city centre and allow the development of the next stage of the Perth transport futures. I note, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but the Perth Transfer Futures, does this cover PKC transport futures? Is the CTLR the only way of reducing congestion in Perth? With a budget in the millions, there must be other ways of delivering this. I realise there might be problems by this because they may not be capital ways, and perhaps it's only possible for the council to solve the issues using a big capital project. But a more sensible park and ride system, incentives for companies in the town to encourage their workers not to use cars to commute, better cycle lanes, and so on, should all be on the agenda. I'm sure that other methodologies will offer novel solutions, for example, driverless cars, control systems using machine learning and controlled by artificial intelligence for traffic systems. You can sure there will be other developments in the future. Unless all the above have been explored, then a road is being developed which simply assumes that new roads are a good thing for Perth, even if their impact on other parts of Perthshire is significant and potentially damaging. Now, returning to the issue of climate change, confronting this is obviously going to be difficult. Pet projects may have to be shelved. But if the council is serious about this issue, then difficult choices are inevitable. Rejecting a decision to build a major new road at a time when reducing current traffic, not increasing it, is the priority, is just the sort of decision that inevitably will have to be made.
You have 1 minute left.
There is the opportunity for PKTC to show some real leadership in this area by cancelling the project and diverting resources into projects which directly support reducing the carbon footprint of Perth and PKC. I'm sure there will be rewards from both UK and Scottish governments for local authorities which are prepared to take such tough decisions as the one in front of you today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul Freeman. I'll hand you back now to the convener. Thank you, convener.
Mr. Paul Freeman, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. And if you're happy with it, I will open it up to questions from councillors. Are you happy with that?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. We have questions from Councillor Wilson. Councillor Wilson, please.
Convener, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Paul Freeman, for your presentation. I want to dwell on just one aspect of that, and that was the effect of traffic flows through the villages in Balbeggie, Burleton, etc. They're not all in your patch, but you were asking about that principle, I think. Given that there's some acknowledgement about traffic flows in the report, what additional evidence base have you got to indicate to the committee that building a CTLR would add significantly to traffic flows through the villages concerned?
Yes. Sorry, the coordination of the visual and sound is not very good here, so I'm assuming the question is over. My answer would be that, first of all, the modelling suggests that initially the increase in traffic would be very small, but I assume that in the longer term, actually, that will increase. Secondly, I know there are a number of studies on what's called induced traffic, which demonstrate that building new roads inevitably results in increased traffic levels. And I have no reason to doubt the authority of the academic studies in this area, though I don't have the references with me, I'm afraid. So to me, that's the key issues. Of course, it's never possible when modelling things to say exactly what is going to happen. Modelling is not an exact science. But if academic research shows that in nearly all cases where new roads are built, you do get an increase in traffic, I'm prepared to accept that.
Thank you, Mr. Paul Freeman. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Committee, do we have any further questions? Yeah, we have no more questions coming up. So, Mr. Portman, thank you very much for giving us your time today. And you also got off a little bit lightly. So thank you very much indeed.
And thank you very much as well.
Thank you. Okay, so that brings us on to our final deputation. We have Mr. Aleister Godfrey, and he would like to address the committee. So, Mr. Godfrey, are you there? Again, if you were muted, could you press *6? That will unmute you.
Yes, it's unmuted now, I hope.
It is. We can hear you loud and clear, sir. Thank you very much
you.
indeed. Again, as with everybody else, I'll pass you over to the Vice Convener, Councillor Braun, who will go through the timings of it, and then it'll come back to myself. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Mr. Godfrey. I hope you can hear me.
Morning.
Good morning to you. As with everyone else, you'll have your 5 minutes to make your deputation. As with everybody else, I will interrupt you at the 4-minute mark, as politely as I can, of course, to warn you have 1 minute left to go. If you're happy with that, I will start the clock when I hear you start your deputation.
That's fine, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm a resident in Perth Kinross and have been for 31 years in Lunkerty. Most of my references that I'm going to refer to are in the applicant's Environmental Impact Assessment Report. Project need and construction. The construction period is estimated at 2.5 years. Phase 1 took 2.5 years to complete. Phase 2 requires 3 times the length of equivalent single carriageway and almost 3 times the length of road bridging. Construction routes would affect 6 core paths in the Lunkerty area, with long-term closures of 2 for the temporary crossing of the River Amond. The use of core paths to access the Lunkerty South development for bridge construction is still unknown. The UK Design Manual for Roads and Bridges limits the approach to developments by placing roads at the centre of design and all other factors made to fit around it. Example, many pages on driver stress, nothing about stress in communities. A 2018 independent report by INRIX placed Glasgow the 4th most congested city in the UK and Edinburgh the 6th, despite huge expenditure on roads. Scottish transport statistics, the current ones, show that we have 3 million vehicles registered in Scotland, 83% cars, dependent on 89% fossil fuels, and only just over 1% are hybrid and electric. Cars and larger vehicles accounted for 65% of Scottish greenhouse gas emissions. Public comment objections outnumber support by 47-1. A very small support for such a big public project. I count the project as in conflict with 15 local development plan policies. I was going to talk about alternatives, but I won't, having listened to Convener, but alternatives are a important consideration for environmental impact assessments, which I'm sure you're all aware of. The CTLR is covered in the T plan, but only brief text without the route shown. Although present in development plans, the project must be viable, but this is not supported by the environmental impact assessment. Traffic pollution and noise. The Lunkerty South development is not included for air quality. Claims are made for the alleviation of pollutants from the centre of Perth, but figures for air quality demonstrate levels of particulates will remain at full build-out rates with CTLR in place. The transport statement predicts annual average daily traffic flows totaling 23,500 vehicles at Inveramond. There is not sufficient room at Inveramond to do anything meaningful with the roundabout to improve it with all this additional traffic. I've also noted that the transport statement doesn't provide an assessment for Queen's Bridge. It in fact confuses this with the Perth Bridge, which shows little difference with the CTLR and all developments in place. Communities, health and access. Older spellings of Red Gorton identify its location as a hill fort origin, first occupied over 2,000 years ago.
You have 1 minute.
It may have had connections with the nearby Roman fort. This is missed out of the report and handling, contrary to Scottish planning policy. The applicant's health assessment relied much on its community questionnaire, but it doesn't cover all of the responses, especially the critical ones. The questionnaire was not promoted widely, and our community was not aware of it until after the questionnaire closed. I concur with Councillor Stewart in relation to biodiversity, and that these impacts will also have a considerable impact on our area. Woodland and Bertha Park, through which the A9 is to be realigned, is currently provided with a management plan under...
Could you start to wind up now, please?
Sure, under condition for the development application, and it says under planting, natural regeneration, recruitment to develop continuous cover. Quite the opposite. Conflicts within LDP2. Climate,
I'm sorry, could I ask you now to come to an end, please?
Sure. The environmental impact assessment is at odds with what we've been told about Section 150 in report of handling. The public have not been given access to the state.
Mr. Godfrey,
I'm sorry, Mr. Godfrey, you're going well over your 5 minutes now. I must ask you to stop now.
That's fine, thanks.
Thank you very much.
You.
Back to you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Braun, and I'm sorry for the abruptness there, Mr. Godfrey, but it is very important to me that everybody gets the same chance. And that's why. So thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you very much for the presentation. I will open it up to questions from the committee. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Godfrey? Okay, we have no questions coming forward on the meeting chat. So, Mr. Godfrey, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. It's much appreciated, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I did state to everybody that I would be intended to take a break at some point, a comfort break. I think it would be sensible to maybe look at doing this now. We have heard from 4 deputations. We've questioned them, and I'm sure everyone has notes. And particularly a small break now, just for 5 minutes, 10 minutes maximum, for a comfort break, and then we'll be back on to ask questions of officers. So could everybody be back ready, shall we say, it's just before, say, 1:45? Is everybody okay with that?
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, everybody. We will, this will be continuing to go live, but we'll have a small break in recess until 1:45. Thank you. Okay, I make that 1:45. So I'm hoping that everybody should be back. I think it would be important to just do a quick roll call. Mr. Williams, are you there? Able to do a roll call? I think it would be sensible if we did that.
Yes, convener. I'm here. So as at the start of the meeting, members, if you just let me know if you're back in. So Councillor Anderson.
Present.
Councillor Barnacle.
I don't think Councillor Barnacle is quite back. I can actually see him visible on my screen that actually he's not back at his computer. Could we possibly come back to him, please, Danny, if that's possible?
Let's go. Councillor Broad.
Present.
Councillor Drysdale.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
Councillor James.
Yeah, present.
Convener referred to myself. Councillor Purvis.
Present.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
Councillor Waters.
Present.
Councillor Williamson.
Present.
And Councillor Wilson.
Present.
Thank you.
Danny, Councillor Barnacle is here. Sorry, you maybe missed me.
Yeah, I was just coming back to you, Councillor Barnacle. So yeah, let's have you back in. Okay, so that should be everyone back in the meeting, convener.
All right, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for allowing that that swift comfort break. Okay, so we are back. So we have listened to the deputations on this application, and we are now opening up to questions to officers. We've had a couple of requests in. So first of all, we'll go to Councillor Gray for your questions, and then on to Councillor Drysdale, who has a couple of questions, I believe. So Councillor Gray, your questions, please.
Yeah, thank you, convener. I'm on Stormotfield Road again. Is there a history of accidents at this junction of the U88 and the 93?
Sorry, it helps if I unmute myself. Yes, if I could possibly go to Lachlan to answer that question, please.
To my knowledge, I don't have that information to hand. Can I go away and have a quick look at that and get back to you on that one, please?
Yeah, certainly. Could I just follow up, Mikey? Could I follow up? Perhaps someone else could give me. What exactly is the rationale for widening most of the road, but not the final 250 metres, and stopping up to vehicular traffic, thereby seriously inconveniencing a significant number of rural dwellers currently dependent on the shorter route than the alternative proposed?
Okay, I actually believe that we have Gillian Ferguson here who's willing to answer that question. So if you could come in, please, Gillian, and then Lachlan, if you can follow up with whatever you find. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Just to pick up on the few points, actually. The first one being you referred to the widening of Stormotfield Road, where we're actually proposing that to both assist pedestrian and cycle use along that route, because that will remain open to them, although we're stopping up for vehicular traffic. And it will also provide improved access for the palace and the racecourse as well. And we're also proposing to upgrade there's a culvert there structure that we're looking to upgrade as well, which was due to be upgraded, so we're doing it as part of the scheme. In terms of the stopping up itself, for the junction, as you'll be aware, straightforward to say that it's good practice to minimise the number of junctions on any road for road safety reasons, because we're providing a safer junction as part of the scheme, which is a roundabout on the A93. There is therefore no need for Stormotfield Road to remain open. There is numerous research documents to evidence that roundabouts are a safer form of junction than crossroads or T-junctions. If you actually think about it, on a roundabout, you're only looking in one direction to the right for traffic, whereas if you're at a T-junction on a crossroads, you're looking both ways to exit.
Yeah, I accept that, but in consideration of the 50 or so households who depend on this junction to go and pick up their daily bread and milk, etc. It seems an extraordinary thing to suddenly ask them to travel an extra 1.4 miles, I think it is, there and back, just to go and do this simple job.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to be exceptionally strict on this to make sure that things are done at the right time. If you have a comment, if that was going on to a question, that's fine, but it sounded like a comment. If you have any comments, councillors, please leave them to the comment section. I'm more than happy to give time for it, but if you have questions for officers, can we stick to questions, please? Councillor Gray, do you have a question there?
Yes, why is it more reasonable to ask people to go through 2 roundabouts and travel 1.44 miles extra to do a journey to go and pick up their daily bread and milk?
I would consider I've actually answered that question as to why you were proposing to stop it up. I think we should also bear in mind that one of the objectives of the scheme as well is to improve accessibility. It's worth noting that those residents, and including others from the kind of northwest side, if you like, will have improved access because they can actually access Perth through another route, which is probably in some occasions quicker than it might be go through Scone and Bridgend and over the bridges into Perth. So they may actually choose to go another route to access services.
Okay, thank you. And Lachlan, you have the statistics back for Councillor Gray.
Yes, I do, Convener. Thank you. Looking at the crash map software online for the last 5 years, so that's 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016 and 2015. In 2016, we had 1 fatality to the north of the Stormontfield Road junction. At the junction itself, we had a slight vehicular incident there, which involved 2 vehicles and 1 reported casualty. And then to the south of that, there was 1 serious collision there, which involved 2 vehicles and 1 casualty. All these incidents occurred in 2016 that have been recorded on the site there.
Do you know if there have been any improvements made to the junction since then?
To my knowledge, I'm not aware of that. They might have put down some friction surface. I think the speed limit has been reduced. I'm sure the 40-mile-an-hour buffer was extended round the bend there as a result of the accidents. But I can't confirm when that actually when that was put in place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions, Councillor Gray. Councillor Drysdale, you have a couple of questions, please.
Yes, thank you, Convener. My first question is transport related. I've noted in the supporting transport papers that between 18% and 25% peak period congestion reduction is anticipated on the Perth bridges at Main Street, Bridgend and Athol Street when CTLR opens. However, I haven't been able to find details on what assumptions underpin these forecasts. In particular, I'm very interested to try to understand what percentage of both current and forecast peak period traffic volumes is thought to be through traffic from the A9 to the northeast and vice versa that may use the CTLR. As opposed to Perth commuter traffic.
My apologies. I'm getting various different messages coming forward to me, and then there's been a little bit of time. Can I state that we have that there are people also included in the committee who are here as in the capacity as experts, not in a other capacity. So they are here to answer questions rather than to be available in that capacity as experts for that, of which Gillian Ferguson is one. So that's why these people are actually here and available to answer questions. Also, their knowledge on this particular application and the work that was done on it is very pertinent to this committee. So I believe that Gillian, you could answer this question that came from Councillor Drysdale. And my apologies for the hiccup there.
Thank you, convener. It would actually be Martin Campbell from Sistra that would actually answer this question.
Yeah,
really.
you're right. I actually see that there. My apologies.
No, it's fine.
Mr. Campbell, could you please answer the question?
Yes. Hi there. Just to touch on that, Councillor Drysdale, I think it was the opening year sort of statistics that you were quoting for Athol Street and was it Bridgend around the Perth bridges in terms of the reductions in traffic volume.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So at the opening year, there is assumed to be elements of local development plan growth on the network in both the scenario without the Crosstail Link Road and the scenario with the Crosstail Link Road. So in terms of the development that comes forward at the opening year, they'd assume to be the same. So what the Crosstail would do simply is open up an alternative route for traffic to use the Crosstail Link Road that otherwise would have to travel through the city. On top of that, there's an additional layer that goes on top of that, which is the strategic traffic, and that's taken from the Transport Model for Scotland. And what that does is that essentially takes the same two scenarios, but allows for trips from, say, the A9 to Inverness, A9 Stirling, M90, A90, A93 and A94, and says this is the current strategic trips coming into and through Perth, and we then run that scenario with the Crosstail Link Road in place, and that gives us the level of change in terms of the strategic trips that would divert onto the Crosstail Link Road. So it's the exact numbers, it's not quantified in the report, but as an insight, if you look at the transport statement, there's a 12% reduction, 12% increase on the A94 corridor is largely strategic traffic. So that's roughly 12% of that total now no longer would continue to come through the Bridgend area and would divert over the top. It really depends on the destination. Traffic that's heading between sort of Blair Gowrie, Cooper Angus down to Broxden and down to the A9 to Stirling, that route, Crosstail, essentially that route would be the route hierarchy that they would take. So we would envisage that a large proportion of the strategic trips would take that, but it does depend on their destination.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I understand what you've described. I was rather looking at it more simplistically, and just trying to understand, you know, the 18 to 25% reductions that the forecast reductions that I quoted. Effectively, are we saying that this is all attributable or mostly attributable to what you describe as strategic traffic? And the reason for my concern, if I can just explain, and maybe you can draw this out in your supplementary answer, is there's been focus rightly on peak hour travel, but I would have thought that certainly a proportion of the strategic travel is all through the day as opposed to at peak hours, and so I'm just trying to get in my head the true reduction in travel through the city of strategic journeys.
It's not something we have explicitly quantified. It's something that it's certainly included within the model, but in terms of presenting the comparison is shown for all trip purposes, so it would be local trips and strategic trips. But I think it's fair to say that particularly through the Bridgend area, that there is a significant number of strategic trips that are now diverting onto the Crosstail Link Road down through Inveralmond and Broxden. The other main local trip that now has opportunity to take Crosstail is anything coming from the Scone Bridgend area that's going up to Inveralmond. So that's a big movement as well that's observed from existing travel patterns, and the Crosstail Link Road being in place allows for that trip to actually have the opportunity to take the Crosstail Link Road over the top. So yeah, the answer, we don't have the exact numbers in terms of strategic traffic per se. So the reduction in numbers is a combination of strategic through traffic and local traffic redistributing as a result of the Cross-Tay Link Road.
Okay, thanks for your answer on that one, which helps a little. My second question is unrelated to that. It's in relation to Scone North and the H29 development. Can officers clarify and confirm my understanding that when the future H29 development site at Scone North comes to this committee for detailed planning approval, that this committee will be able then to satisfy itself that any traffic and air quality issues and concerns are fully addressed?
Well, I will go to Mr. Smith to answer that, but I would categorically state as convener that anything coming forward at that time to be assessed would take into consideration every single one of the planning policies that we have and has to meet it accordingly. But I will pass it over to Mr. Smith for either an answer or more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Councillor Drysdale, for your question. Yes, that's correct. You know, at this point in time, other than the planning permission in principle and the way in which the relationships are set out in the development plan, the detail of the design and layout of those areas closest to the CTLR has not been presented to us yet. So as we set out in the report, it's premature to commit to any conclusions. But overall, we are satisfied that mitigations and design elements could be undertaken such that we would not be prejudicing H29. But that will be a matter for a future application, which is likely to be presented before this committee, yes.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. Councillor Purvis, you're next on the list for questions. So can you have your questions for officers, please?
Thank you, convener. My first question is on the ancient woodland inventory and the information that's provided in the report. It's welcome to see that there's a recognition that there's a presumption in favour of protecting woodland resources and that ancient woodland should only be lost where this is unavoidable, and then the mitigating measures should be put in place. I suppose my question is, given that the council itself has identified that there is an alternative route that would not go through ancient woodland, although took a decision not to progress with this, how can it then be said that the loss of ancient woodland is unavoidable? That's the first question.
I'm not sure who would like to take that.
I can take that, or Peter could take it.
I was wondering whether it was going to come from the planning perspective or from yourself, sorry, or from the development. But anyway, we'll go to Mr. Marshall to answer that question, please, and then Christian, if you have anything you wish to add.
Thank you, convener. Throughout the process of developing the options for the Cross-Tay Link Road, and I'm going back 7 years or more in this stage, there was extensive discussions between SNH, SEPA and Historic Environment Scotland about optimising a route through from the west bank of the Tay right through to the A94. And it was recognised that there was a range of constraints ranging from the ancient monuments to the ancient woodland, where we needed to weave the route through. And as you'll see on the map, that the route is not take the straightest and simplest route, and it is to avoid and minimise the damage to the ancient woodland. And we have to take account of all of the factors, not just ancient woodland, but the ancient monuments and other designations, as well as the efficiency of the route. And for any project like this, there is always going to be a certain amount of compromises. And the opinion was that this was the best option for the Cross-Tay Link Road, taking account of the constraints we face through the natural and built heritage and the efficiency of the route to divert traffic from going through Perth. Sorry, I can't give you any more information than that.
Gillian, I think you also have a point to make if you want to come forward with that, please.
Thank you, Convener. It was really just to pick up on what actually Peter said, but also to highlight that we did also look at the impacts on ancient woodland if we had selected the northern alignment that was mentioned previously. It was just to really make that point that the woodland would still be impacted, just slightly less than the current route.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, do you need to come back on that, or are you happy with those?
Well, it would just be yes, that we can't look at issues in singularity, that there are a multitude of issues to be considered and balanced out here. And yes, ancient woodland is one issue, and we've covered that within the report, but it is not the only issue in coming to the decision. So when balancing that, we have come to the position that we have, if that simplifies things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine, and that's clearly a value judgment to make, but obviously we as members have to make our own value judgment on that. The second question was on air quality, which is following on from the question raised by Councillor Drysdale and some of the comments that were made in the deputation by Professor Belch. Clearly in our policy 57, it talks about aspiring to improve air quality and also eliminate the gradual worsening in air quality. While we're talking about mitigation measures when these applications come forward, is it the case that it would be possible to eliminate all of the air quality deterioration that would be felt by the H29 site, the residents there, or is it just a case we would try to reduce that? Because if that is the case, then is it not the case again that it is avoidable should the route be in a different place?
Yes, and before I go over to Kirsty Stevens on that, I just want to reiterate, I know I've said this and I'm not suggesting entirely, but I want to be clear that we are assessing the application in front of us, not any possible other applications that could be in front of us. So I just wanted to highlight that again, because we don't have an alternative route in front of us and we don't have an alternative application. We have the one in front of us, and I would just like to make that perfectly clear.
Sorry, Tina, if I could just very briefly respond to that. I absolutely appreciate that point. I suppose the point I'm making in these questions is that if the test is something unavoidable, then by necessity you have to consider what other options are available, even if that is not a specific route. So that's what the reason behind some of my questions.
Okay,
thank you.
I was muted by someone there. That was nice. Okay. Can I take it over to Kirsty Stevens for an answer to that, please?
Convener, possibly this may be better answered by Rebecca McLean from SWECO.
Absolutely. I'm working down the list. Well, fine. We'll head over to Ms. McLean, if you wouldn't mind answering the question, please.
Thanks, Convener. I think when we're looking at air quality, particularly for H29, the thing that's important to note is that there won't be a decrease or a worsening of air quality for residents in H29 because they won't live there before the Crosstay Link Road is in place. I think the other key thing to note is that the predicted levels of air quality pollution of the key pollutants of nitrogen dioxide and PM10 in this area when the Crosstay Link Road is open is less than 25% of the national air quality objectives in comparison to some of the hotspots in the centre of Perth, which are either exceeding or close to exceeding the air quality objectives themselves. So although there are concerns about the road and the location, I think from an air quality and noise perspective, the assessments that have been undertaken don't indicate that there are issues with air quality concentrations close to the road in these areas.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Okay, Councillor Purvis, do you have any further questions?
No, I don't have any further questions, but I'm going to make a point of order, and I have raised some of these concerns with you, Convener, and thank you for your previous answers on it. I just think that, clearly, and thank you for that answer from the representative from SWECO, but that is someone who has done a an assessment for the council and for the applicant, in no other circumstances would it be appropriate for someone who had done an independent study to answer questions during this point in the questioning. I've also made similar points in relation to some of the people who are leading the project, and you yourself have raised the concern about whether we're talking from a strategic planning point of view or from the specific application. I am very concerned that this is very unorthodox, and while I appreciate there are some additional considerations and it is perfectly legitimate for this committee to determine the application, I am particularly concerned with who is being allowed to answer questions as part of these proceedings.
Okay, and as you say, you did raise that with me personally, and I did try to answer it. As the council is the applicant, there is a leeway, and it was done with schools and various bits and pieces before, but I'm going to refer it now to Jeff Fogg, our legal representative, and he will be able to give us the legal position and where we actually stand on this and why we have additional people in to answer questions. Mr. Fogg, over to you, please.
Yes, convener. I mean, I think we're all aware, Councillor Purvis is aware, you're aware, the committee is aware that this is a different situation, unlike any other, because the council is both developer applicant and it is the planning authority. That is an inherent, that is the reality of the matter, and we are obliged to proceed and go forward in these circumstances. That being the case, it's then appropriate that the council provides the most appropriate officers to answer such questions as the committee may have, and that includes Ms Ferguson, Ms McLean, because they are the particular experts in the respective questions that have been asked of them. We cannot alter that because we require to determine the application that's now in front of us, and that's how it comes to be as it is. The alternative would have been for this application to have been determined by the Scottish Government, but the Scottish Government made it clear that it doesn't want that to happen, so we have to just proceed as we are doing this morning.
I have and I hear from Kirsty Stephen as well. Do you wish to address this?
Yes, please, if I could. Councillor Purvis, I understand your concerns. As a result of that question, we'd actually organised for a separate independent peer review of the assessments that have been done by SWECO from a separate environmental consultancy, just to ensure that the methodology, the control measures and the approach generally taken by SWECO was in agreement as part of the peer review, and that was accepted.
Sorry, convener, thank you, and thank you for those answers. Just very briefly to respond to that, it was no criticism of SWECO or of any individual who was answering the questions. It was about who was answering the questions at the committee and given the specific circumstances. So thank you for that clarification. I think we'll have to agree to disagree on this point. Thank you.
Okay, fine, we will agree to disagree. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Purvis. We then move on to Councillor Barnacle. Your question, please.
Thanks, convener. I've got three questions. Firstly, I'd just like to say, actually, in a former life, as convener of the Environment Service, I was instrumental in getting the air monitoring stations put in Perth city centre. So I share concerns about the pollution levels in Perth, and I am fully supportive of the concept of the Cross-Tay Link Road. I have a problem with the route, and I've stated that before, and so my questions really are around that situation. First of all, with transport, we heard from that they think there might be a capacity problem at the Inveralmond roundabout. Certainly the report acknowledges that with peripheral traffic, and the CTLR itself, as stated by Bridgend CC, is not a fully encompassing Perth bypass, because it presumably, if you're travelling from Inverness to Dundee, you've still got to take, unless you took the route to Aberdeen and then Dundee, if you were coming from Inverness down the A9 and used the CTLR, then you would end up just north of Scone, and presumably you would drive, as you do now, to the Dundee Road, Dundee Perth Road. So I can understand why there's concerns that, you know, because it's not a fully encompassing ring road that links into what we've currently got, the flyover over the Tay, you know, it's not going to deal fully with the problems. So I presume there were geographic constraints to that, and that wasn't looked at. So that's the first question. Do you want to go one at a time?
Yes, yes, please, Councillor Barnacle. I'm not sure I was quite following your question there, but maybe officers did. Could you, yes, Mr. McLean, could you answer the question, please?
Thank you, convener. I was going to focus on the first point about the Inveralmond roundabouts and Broxden roundabouts. I note your concern regarding them. One of the things that Perth Kinross Council has been doing in the background is working with the likes of Transport Scotland to look for mitigation measures for the Inveralmond and Broxden roundabouts. That work's still ongoing. We're still in dialogue with them, and we'll continue to be in dialogue with them to seek improvements at those locations. It's fair to say that there is works on the A9 ongoing north of Perth. We've got the dual carriageway works, and it would seem a good opportunity for Perth and Kinross Council and Transport Scotland to work together to look for improvements at, say, Inveralmond and Broxden roundabouts. With the implementation of phase 1 of the project, there has been opportunities to rebalance the signals at the likes of the Inveralmond roundabout. That's something that Transport Scotland's operating company has looked at. It's important to say that Inveralmond roundabout and Broxden roundabouts aren't in the control of Perth and Kinross Council, and they are in the control of Transport Scotland for that aspect.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Barnacle, your follow-on questions, please.
Thanks, convener. The second one is planning. It's paragraph 112. This has been mentioned before, but I'm still querying why it's not appropriate at this stage to consider the line of the route, because surely it is, from my perspective anyway, bad planning to put a major road through a potential new settlement in the local development plan. So surely if we decide today to go with the route proposed, that is virtually a fait accompli for how we look at the subsequent planning application. I'd like to hear from planning about that.
Thank you. Yeah, again, maybe if we could go to Mr. Marshall initially regarding of where we are, and then maybe if Mr. Smith would like to come in on that after. Mr. Marshall, please.
Thank you, convener. If we look at the route in its entirety, and I'm including the A85A9 junction and the area through Bertha Park, you can see that one of the functions of this route was to open up development land, and it was quite intentional that this route would go through Bertha Park, and would be no issues raised with regard to the route going through Bertha Park, and to connect in through the Scone North development, opening up this area, for development. You should say that the prime function of the route, when it was conceived or when it was investigated, was to remove the traffic from the town centre, but to take advantage of the potential to open up development land in addition. It did not attract objections in Bertha Park. It's seen as an asset to the development, improving the connectivity of that development. And it's only been raised latterly with Scone North.
Okay, thank you. And as been requested, that we've actually got the LDP Perth slide has been put up on the screen for councillors to see, that it can see that it actually does go through other development sites on the other side. So that's a visual there. Okay, Councillor Barnacle, your follow-on question.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks for that reply, Peter. The final question is really for legal. We've had 2 full council decisions endorsing this route. So presumably, if one has still got concerns about the line of the route and would prefer a more northerly route, the only recourse today is to move refusal of the application. Is that correct?
Sorry, I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Fogg. But yes, but there needs to be a reason for refusal. But Mr. Fogg, if you would please answer the question.
Yes, Convener, Councillor Barnacle is correct. If he felt that, or if the strength of his objection to the alignment through site H29 was so strong that he felt it appropriate to move refusal, that would be his motion or his amendment. In so doing, he would have to give cognizance to the explanations given by Mr. Smith and by Peter Marshall this morning, that the route was chosen after close consultation with both SNH and SEPA, having regard to the various constraints, not just ancient woodland, but also ancient monuments, and looking at the efficiency of the route. And from that detailed assessment, the consensus of these different agencies was this was the optimal alignment. So that would need to be given appropriate regard in assessing the reasonableness of an amendment to refuse because of the unacceptability of the route at its eastern end. But it's ultimately a planning judgment for the committee to make.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Barnacle. Okay. My apologies. Councillor Anderson, you're next on the list. Councillor Anderson, can I have your questions, please?
Thank you. Yes, I've got 2 questions. The first one is relating to ancient woodland, and perhaps I don't know if there's anyone here can actually answer this question, but to get clarity on this ancient woodland, which I actually take exception to woodlands being called ancient, because I suspect, and I want clarity, is this production woodland, which works in a 70 to 100 year cycle of planting, thinning, select thinning, clear felling, and then planting again, which looking at the maps that I see, not the one there, because that's now we're on to another map, it seems to be that this is what I'm looking at. Can someone give me clarity on that?
Yes, thank you. We've got 2 answers here. If we could start with Mr. Smith and then to Mr. Marshall. Thank you.
Yes, there are various characterizations as to what would constitute an ancient woodland, and that is set out within some of the supporting documents. But in terms of the way you described them, Councillor, it's not quite that way. It's different types. I'm not sure if Peter's going to go into the detail types of ancient woodland, and it goes from woodland which has effectively never been disturbed down to different types where perhaps there's 100 years or so of existence of them, all of which can contribute to the biodiversity quality of those areas. But I'll maybe defer to Peter if he wants to go into some detail on that.
Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Convener. I can't add a lot to that. Christian's certainly right. The key point is that there's been woodland in this area for several hundred years, and the main biodiversity interest is in the flora and fauna that developed in it, the seed stock that's in the ground, rather than the individual trees, which in some cases can be newly planted. Thank you.
Just to follow on from that, how many trees with TPOs would be being taken out for this road to go through?
A good question. Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. Who would like to answer that? Does anyone know how many TPO?
I think I'd maybe have to defer to the case officer, Callum Purvis, on that, who might have more detail on it. But the issue of ancient woodland and other things is covered in some detail at paragraphs 142 and the following ones. But Callum can take that, thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Petrie, if you wouldn't mind coming in if you've got any additional information on that.
Good afternoon, convener. Thank you very much for that question and introduction. Just on the basics of it, we don't have, it's not specifically protected. It's something that's a designation or a characteristic of the land, as Mr. Smith and Mr. Marshall set out from earlier, taking the sort of specifics of it from maps from 1750 that kind of determine that ancient woodland itself, and the actual affected woodland is in excess of 12 hectares across the entire site. So that's the affected ancient woodland designation, and obviously in line with the Scottish Forestry response, it'd be well in excess of that replanted. And I think if I can just also bring you to the conditions and recommendations, specifically conditions 11, 12 and 13 of the report, that actually covers off some of the stuff that Mr. Marshall was referring to and Mr. Smith in terms of soil relocation and seed mixes and things like that, in terms of part of the accepted mitigation measures that both the Council and Planning Authority and Nature Scotland, previously Scottish Natural Heritage, considered to be an acceptable approach in terms of the loss of the ancient woodland itself.
Thank you. I believe that. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Anderson, but I believe Mr. Marshall also wants to come in on your point.
Thank you, convener. To the best of my knowledge, there are no TPOs affected by the Crosstay Link Road, and I should say that it is extremely unusual in the Scottish context to have a tree preservation area on a tree preservation order rather on an area of woodland. It largely refers to small groups and individual trees, and the reason for that is exactly as Councillor Anderson indicated. Some of these are commercial plantations, and it is expected they will be removed and replaced at certain times. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. My apologies, Councillor Anderson, but there is additional information coming forward just to better answer your question. So, Mr. Petrie, if you would come in with that as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, conveners. Sorry, apologies if I wasn't clear in my previous answer. I did try or attempt to answer the tree preservation order element. I can clarify that there is no tree preservation order trees that will be affected through the proposals themselves. So none of the trees that are proposed to be felled are subject to a tree preservation order.
Thank you very much for that clarity. I have another question on a different matter. Concerns was raised about flooding issues. Now, normally when a new roadway is built, the construction also usually ties in their own drainage plus any land surrounding. Usually there is supplementary drainage in there to ensure that that land is kept as good as it was before the road was built. Can you confirm that that will be the similar method when building this CTLR?
Yes, Mr. Stewart, would you like to answer that question, please?
Oh, sorry. Hi. Yes. So as part of the flood risk assessment for the Crosstay Link Road, they have looked extensively at the impacts of the road and have included not only the SUDs to do with the road itself, but also to do with any issues relating to the land that it may cut off, flow past to the water courses. So there's additional ditching and other items included within that.
Thank you. That was fine. Fine short question, fine short answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Councillor Anderson, and thank you for the answer there. Okay, that takes us on to Councillor Braun. You're next on the list. Councillor Braun, can I have your questions, please?
Yep. Thank you, convener. I want to go back to this question of pollution because it was raised by several deputations, and I just want to clarify with their officers what their thoughts were. The first thing was the question of pollution in Bridgend and how it would move up to Scone. And my question is, are we actually judging like for like? Because obviously Bridgend has higher buildings effectively enclosing it, whereas Scone is much more open. So would the concentrations be the same? Are we actually effectively not judging like for like, is my question. That's the first one.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. If we could pass that over. Becky, I think I'll come to you for an answer, please.
Thanks, convener. In short, no, they are not like for like. In terms of the pollutants being able to disperse, you don't have the same type of canyon effect that you have in Bridgend that you would do in Scone, and that's reflected in the air quality assessment results and the concentrations that are predicted at the various different receptor locations that cover the city centre, Bridgend and Scone itself.
Thank you for that. My supplementary question was, I also questioned the point of new technology in cars coming through, which would reduce emissions, which was agreed that all the deputations I spoke to said they agreed that, but the question was particulates. And my question, perhaps back again, would be the fact that this new modern technology uses regenerative braking. That does, I believe, reduce braking particulates into the air because the energy of the motion of the car is transferred into electrical energy to recharge the battery rather than you having to put your foot on the brake. I think I'm right in that. Is that correct?
Yeah, reduction? Yeah, absolutely. You're asking Becky specifically, so again, I'm happy for that. But equally, if Kirsty Stevens wants to come in, that would be
whichever.
fine.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can't profess to be an expert in EV cars, I'm afraid, but my understanding is that in general, even with particulates, the emissions will be reduced from each car. In terms of the percentage reduction, I'm not sure exactly what that would be. Kirsty might be able to add some more, but my understanding is yes, there will be a reduction.
Fine, thank you.
Thank you. Kirsty, do you have anything you wish to add?
Yes, I would concur with Becky that we're generally seeing a downward trend in relation to emissions from vehicles, and that is likely to continue.
Fine. Okay. Thank you very much, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. Councillor Wilson, you're next on the list. Would you like to ask your questions, please, sir?
Thanks, convener. And a process point, first of all, in trying to get the question in, the box wasn't behaving very well at this end, and I may have a blip in transmission. I could hear what was going on, but I lost visual contact for a few seconds. If that's recorded on the big scheme of things with our IT colleagues, I just want to draw attention to that now. But I did hear all the discussion at the meeting, but if there's a problem in interruption, then I prefer to be advised of it before the end of the meeting, before we deliberate on any final decision.
Okay, it is my understanding, Councillor Wilson, that loss of visual is not a problem. Sometimes it is important for people to remove the visual side of it to keep the audible side if there is a concern over IT and internet access. So my understanding is that there's not an issue for the visual as long as you are able to hear and understand fully the full debate at every point.
Yeah, yes to both, but if our colleagues want to check on that, then I'm quite happy for them to do so. My question about the Stormontfield Road's been already asked. Two questions. One is in relation to the A93, A94 villages. It's been mentioned before about mitigation because there could be effects on them. Have we any plans for mitigation, or do we simply pick that up as events take us? That's maybe a question for our roads colleagues. And then I've one more question.
My apologies. I'll keep trying to press the mute button or to take it off, and I keep having an issue. So my apologies, Councillor Wilson. Lachlan, if I could pass that to you, please.
Thank you, convener. In short, we haven't identified any major mitigation measures that we want to put in. What we have planned to do is to continue to monitor the impacts of the Crosstail Link Road. So what it's proposed is that we might put a couple of automatic traffic counters along the network, just so that we can see what's actually happening with travel demand and patterns. And then if there's anything significant that potentially crops up, that can be investigated further, and then measures can be identified at that point. I think it would be worthy to see what the impact of the project is actually going to be. We have a rough idea of what the impacts are likely to be, but whether they come to fruition, I think it would be prudent to wait until that point and then move forward with that. And I think the other thing is that we are looking at route action plans for the likes of the A93 and A94, which will continue to identify measures. So we have looked at a number of measures along the routes, particularly up I think the A94. We have looked at speed partnership laybys for the enforcement vehicles to go up there as well. So there have been a number of measures that we looked at to try and improve the roads as they currently are, and would continue to do that.
Thank you, Lachlan. Mr. Petrie, you also wish to make to answer that question.
Thank you, Convener. It was just really a follow-up to Mr. McLean's response, which covers everything off, but it's for members' attention that what Mr. McLean is referring to in terms of monitoring and evaluation is covered off within condition 18 of the report, if members wish to view that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Convener, for these comprehensive answers. My other one's about habitat and wildlife. There is a green bridge proposed at a certain point in the new road. Is my reading of the report was there was only one specified one, and are there any other opportunities for safe crossing points for foot, cycle, wildlife traffic between the Blairgowrie Road and the Cooper Angus Road, if I can call them their day-to-day names, apart from the Green Bridge? That would include perhaps an underpass as well as an overpass, or any other facility that might be made available. I can't think of what that would be, but I know there have been innovative solutions about wildlife channels, if you like, in other road schemes in Scotland. Just wondered if we had any proposals of that kind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I can go to Mr. McLean.
Sorry, I think I muted myself and then unmuted myself there. Thank you, Convener, for that. Yes, there are a number of crossing locations that are going to be implemented along the route. They're mainly for pedestrians in terms of there'll be signalised crossings at some of the roundabouts along the route. And then you've also got the Green Bridge, as you say. I'm not aware of any kind of wildlife crossings other than what's there. That might be something that Gillian could potentially answer if that's a question that you're looking for a response to.
Gillian, do you have anything you wish to add or answer at that?
Yes, we are installing mammal shelves in some of the culverts. My colleague at Sweco, Denise Ritchie, should be able to be more specific about that. Russell Stewart has obviously said as well that he can come in on that as well.
Okay, well, in that case, we'll go to Mr. Stewart first, and if there's any additional information, if you could just let me know. Mr. Stewart.
Oh, hello. Yeah, the culverts, as Gillian said, do include manhole shelves to allow passage of wildlife from one side of the culvert to the other. I only know that because of reviewing it for the flood risk purpose, but yeah, the Sweco personnel will probably give you a further, more detailed answer than me.
Okay, thank you. Right. I see that Callum wants to come in, but do we have anybody from Sweco that wishes to add any more detail to that?
Yes, I can do that, Convener.
Thank you.
Yes, on the Stormontfield Road culvert that Gillian referred to earlier, we're actually installing a separate mammal passage tunnel, which the councillor was alluding to. That's required just to keep the size of the culvert down because of clearance issues in terms of the headroom. And on the A9 culvert at Bertha Lochburn, we have a mammal passage ledge within the culvert itself. So those are the additional measures. The whole route has been assessed in terms of mammal passage to identify any requirements for tunnels and so on. And these are the locations that were identified as requiring it.
Okay, thank you. And Callum, you have also requested that you wanted to come in. If you've got anything additional to add, please.
Yes, thank you, convener. Just working again on or building on on other colleagues' points and Councillor Wilson's questioning in terms of the impact on biodiversity and habitat. Is really just to say that in addition to what Ms. Ritchie and others have set out, including Russell, there is a condition as well that will be looking at the additional hedging and trees for the wider connectivity in relation to the biodiversity. So it's really looking at the wider route and enhancing and maximising that connective route, as well as the safe passage across these main crossing points.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, we've had a few officers there answer your question. Hopefully that answers it for you. Do you have a follow-on question?
I'm grateful for the comprehensive answers. My question was particularly in, if you like, the Scone bit of the road, and I think we still only have one designated green bridge crossing. I'm not totally comfortable with it only being one, but I'll bide my time at the moment, convener. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Williamson, you have a question.
Yes, thank you very much, convener. It was really around about the ancient woodland and the removal of trees. It very much seems to me as though it's an all or nothing thing. We either chop trees down to make space for what we want, or and then transplant, or just leave them alone. And I'm just wondering if there's any consideration being actually given to using tree space to actually pick some of these semi-mature stroke mature trees up and move them into other places.
Thank you very much indeed for your question. Which officer would like to answer that, if there's been any consideration given to physical movement? Mr. Smith. And sorry, Gillian Ferguson, you're suggesting Becky might like to answer it. So if we start with Becky and then we'll come in with Mr. Smith. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, convener. This is something that we've discussed in quite a lot of detail with Scottish Natural Heritage, and the kind of additional ecological enhancement measures that could be considered as part of the wider scheme. As Callum stated earlier about the compensatory planting and having to follow the guidance from the Scottish Government, we have also looked at the soil translocation trial of the ancient woodland. One of the main discussions with Scottish Natural Heritage was the benefits that we could perhaps bring in terms of better management of some of the existing woodlands around Perth, and following consultation with the biodiversity officers at Perth Kinross Council and the green space officers, what we have now agreed with them is that better woodland management will be carried out along the Perth Lade. And this will include the removal of non-native species, thinning and pruning of the existing tree coverage there, planting of appropriate native species along the route as we kind of clear it through, and also actually improvements into the riverbed itself in terms of clearance of vegetation and litter, etc., because the river is used by salmon and various fish as well. So the discussion hasn't been necessarily about taking full trees and relocating them, but I suppose looking at the kind of wider benefits that could be brought through better woodland management of other existing areas.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. Mr. Smith, you wanted to add to that?
Yes, it was just saying that obviously there's a very wide-ranging approach being taken here, not just in relation to the impacts that are resulting from the CTLR itself, but there's also been options looked at well beyond that to see how improvements can be made to try and mitigate some of the issues. It's maybe a point to make as well that it's not necessarily the trees in themselves, but everything that goes with that habitat. So there's discussion there as well about the translocation of the soils, which are very rich in terms of their biodiversity, etc., etc. But it's quite clear to us that significant efforts have been made to try and deal with the impacts on the ancient woodland, although we all appreciate that those measures in themselves cannot replicate exactly the situation which was in place previously.
Councillor Williamson, does that answer your question?
No, not really, Convener, because I'm just trying to reconcile in my head how the soil type differs so widely between one area and perhaps moving them, say, I don't know, 200, 300, 400 yards away, so that we can still get this roadway through. Have the soil types been tested on either side of this road, and how varied are those soil types within that area? I recognise that some of it may be agricultural land and some of it may be other areas, but to me it feels like we chop these trees down, it takes 25, 30 years just to replicate what was possibly already there, and the effects on the carbon capturing that the trees undertook it then.
Yes. Mr. Marshall would like to come back on that. I think if I can go to him first and then to Mr. Smith. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I think it's worth noting that through the plantations here, it's perhaps fair to say that the individual trees as specimens are not particularly important. It's the area itself having a history of ancient woodland. So transporting a tree to another location is not perhaps advantageous there. The other thing that you did mention was the carbon capture, and it's my understanding that as a tree is growing, it is capturing more carbon, say beyond year 5 when it's starting to develop some presence, and up to approximately year 50. But a mature tree is not absorbing as much extra carbon. It contains carbon, as you'll be aware, in its structure, but it's not absorbing more. So growing trees are better in terms of carbon capture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. And Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I think it's just pointing out the nature of the soils in themselves. It's how those soils and the substrate, etc., has evolved over a considerable period of time. So it's not just the soil, but it's everything that lies within that, and all the microorganisms and other species and things which are within that. It's not looking at a soil, what is the soil within a field and what is the soil within an ancient woodland. It's a very complex issue which is discussed in quite some detail in a lot of the supporting documents, and we could perhaps pass that to the councillor if he wished to read the extensive detail on that.
Yeah, I feel that would be very useful if you don't mind, but I'm just kind of slightly minded that where possible, is this something that could be actually added as a condition going forward to this, as if this application was successful?
What condition are you referring to? That we
I do apologise,
transplant trees?
Yeah, just to basically try and transplant some of these trees and move them where possible.
I'm not 100% sure of whether that is a competent condition to add, but I will leave that for officers to come back on. If we could just sort of put a pin in that at the moment, and if officers could have a think of whether that would be competent or not. Oh, Mr. Smith, you're wishing to answer that right away. Okay, please do so.
Yeah, and perhaps Callum can clarify this as well, but there are conditions that deal with that issue and how best to deal with the impacts on the ancient woodland and what the approach would be appropriate to try and maximise the benefits that we can achieve to mitigate against that loss. So we do have conditions of that type.
Okay, thank you. Do you wish to come in, Callum? Yes, Callum.
Sorry, Convener, sorry. for the delay. Yeah, just on that, I think we have already discussed it, but condition 12 specifically looks at the requirement for a detailed site investigation of the ancient woodland inventory, and in association with that, condition 13 then looks at the agreed locations of the compensatory woodland planting and soil relocation, and obviously the seed mixes themselves. I think what is being asked for by the councillor, I'm not obviously we've been advised by specialists from Nature Scotland, SNH, and our internal biodiversity officer and green space teams, and to date there has not been a suggestion that relocation of existing tree stock, where, as Mr. Marshall pointed out, a lot of it is commercial planting woodland as opposed to mature sort of species where you've got sort of individual species trees and things like that. It is much more largely commercial plantation, so there's not been a suggestion that would be to the best use of resources in terms of compensatory measures, but I can't say whether or not it's completely out of the question to investigate them.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we do have to come forward with what is suitable and what is within a requirement and a request. So I'm not 100% sure if we can actually do what's been asked there, Councillor Williamson, but there seems to be some question mark over that, but we already have been put in places, officers are telling us there are information put in places and to be able to mitigate the movement of these trees or the removal of these trees. But thank you very much indeed for your question. Okay, councillors, do we have any further questions?
I'm going to have to comment here in a minute. So.
Thank you for that, Councillor Drysdale, but I think if you have a comment, maybe we can wait till the comment section, so my apologies.
Apologies,
I have a question.
My microphone is live.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so you do, Councillor Anderson. Sorry, my apologies. I know that you were on my list from earlier. You have an additional question.
Yeah, sorry to come in late with this, but it was when the discussions was on about the woodland there once again. I forgot to ask officers that, again, Woodland Trust came in with a late objection. Has officers looked at what's been said, and can they take on board any of the issues that they have put forward? It's very similar to what we've been discussing lately about woodlands. Can officers make a comment on the Woodland Trust, or was it too late for them to take any advice from?
Yeah, Mr. Smith, if you could come in and answer that, please.
Yeah, I'm assuming that Councillor Anderson is referring to the fact that the Woodland Trust circulated to members what they had already submitted to us. So I'm not sure if you mean by a late representation that it was circulated to members of the committee the other day there, but we already had that representation, which in itself was submitted to us late, but was recognised in the report. I'm not sure if Callum can add anything further to that.
Callum, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, convener, and Mr. Smith. I think that really, as Mr. Smith has already answered, we did take account of that representation as part of the wider assessment, and it's reflected within the report of handling itself.
Thank you. It was just to give me comfort that, as I said, the email suggested it came in late, and concerns that there wasn't maybe any consideration given to it. But I just thought I would ask the question.
No, thank you. And it seems that that has been taken into consideration. So thank you, Councillor Anderson. Yeah, I would just actually like to ask one question, and it comes forward from the health aspect that was put on place. And I would like the officers to come back on the 500 metre comment that was made in the deputations. If somebody could please come back to their understanding of that, please. Is there anyone who's willing to answer that. Thank you very much, Becky. It's being put to yourself. We've had 3 people nominating you, Becky, so over to you. Thank you.
Can I just ask you to repeat the question, if that's okay, just so I'm clear what it is that you're looking to have answered?
Certainly. It was highlighted in the deputations that there was an NHS Tayside report that came in late. I know that the NHS Tayside were consulted not only in the first local development plan and in the second development plan, but that there was some understanding of a 500 metre, I believe was my notes, issue regarding the pollutants. So I was wondering what the officers' view were on that and if it had any relevance.
When I was trained as an environmental consultant, I was actually an air quality consultant for a number of years, and the general rule of thumb tended to be, in terms of a drop-off of pollutant concentrations, that there would be significant changes within 200 metres from a pollutant source, particularly along roadways. I think when you look at the air quality assessment that's been carried out for the Crosstay Link Road, and in particular the contour pollutant maps that were prepared that show the different levels of concentrations from the road centre line, and as you get further away from them, it kind of highlights that general rule of thumb of 200 metres. I haven't been aware of a 500 metre rule of thumb, but that was what we used to use in terms of our assessment protocols. So I think for the Crosstay Link Road, I think those contour maps answer that query in particular, because you can see how it drops off.
No, that answers the question perfectly. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we have no more questions regarding this, so I would like to move the paper. As I stated in my opening remarks, we are here today to assess the application before us as it pertains to the development plan and whether the proposal is contrary to or in accordance with said plan. The Crosstay Link Road has been included in the local development plan process, both, as I've already stated, in the previous plan, in the plan that we currently adopt, and it has been assessed by the reporter at every stage. There has been consultation on that with communities. There has been a very detailed process done, and the Crosstay Link Road is in the development plan. We've listened to both sides of the argument today. I've tried to make sure that everybody has had a chance to have their say. I haven't minimised any questions. There has been a chance for everybody to have an open and robust debate. And I cannot see any reason from the discussion that we have had, and there is no valid reason that we do not agree with the officer's recommendation to approve this application as it is, as I've stated, in accordance with the development plan. And I can see that I have Councillor James happy to second. Councillor James, any comments, please?
Thanks very much, convener. I'm more than happy to second what we've got before us. You're correct. We've had plenty of debate. We're very fortunate with this council. We've got some fantastic experts who've been involved with the planning of this road from the outset, and there's been a full consultation and councillor involvement from stage one. Every problem that we've been faced with has been mitigated, in my opinion. You're never ever going to get something that's absolutely perfect, but I think this is as good as it gets, and I'm more than happy to second it. It opens up so much more than, it's not just the road, it opens up opportunities for housing, for employment, and something, if we want Perth to expand and go forward, we need this road, and I'm more than happy to second you, convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Purvis, you have an amendment.
Thank you, convener. I note the points that you've made already about the fact that we're not taking a strategic decision on whether the road should go ahead, and I think that's absolutely right, and I agree with the point that you've made on that. I think what we do need to consider, though, is when we're assessing the application against some of the particular planning policies and determining whether or not there are alternatives that could mitigate some of those impacts, we do need to consider whether alternative routes and alternative options are available. As I think I said earlier on, the council itself has demonstrated that there is an alternative route which would mitigate some of the problems that I'm going to now highlight. I note the points from the community councils of objection and also from NHS Tayside, and I know that in the past both I and others have raised concerns about NHS Tayside not participating fully in the process, and I acknowledge that they didn't do that at LDP1 and LDP2, but I think given that we've pressed so much for them to engage in this process, the fact that they have participated and given what I would characterise, contrary to the report, as an objection, I think we should take cognizance of that. In particular, the policies where I think that this application fails are on placemaking, policies 1A and 1B. I think from my own experience in my ward of Kinross, the A977 being a particular example, that having a main arterial route going through communities is not something that we would want to encourage. That's the same we see in other parts of Perth and Kinross, including the A93. I think that if we can make an active decision now to decide where a route would go, we should not be knowingly putting that through H29 Scone North. There are a number of reasons for this, the health reasons that have been outlined, which I will return to in a minute, but also some of the issues that have been raised about community cohesion. I think that doesn't create a sense of identity with the structures and buildings that are being put in place, and I don't think fully accounts for the safety and accessibility of the surroundings. I think that in terms of air quality, there are some serious concerns that have been raised, and while we might be able to mitigate some of them to a certain extent, I don't think that we can have a situation where if we put the route in a different place, that would not be a better route for reducing the impact on air quality. I don't think it's acceptable to say that just because the residents aren't there yet, that we can't make air quality worse. And it will be worse for them when they are there than it would be had we chosen another alternative. And I think the fact that NHS Tayside and others have raised concerns about this is something that we should be taking cognizance of. I also think there are concerns on policy 56 around noise pollution that would not be there should we choose a different route. I think that to put the route where we are proposing as part of this planning application is bad planning in the extreme. In terms of the other environmental concerns, including the ancient woodland, I'm very concerned about the proposal for the current route that would see a significant amount of ancient woodland that is recorded in the ancient woodland inventory removed. Again, while noting some of the points that officers made earlier on, we would significantly reduce the impact on ancient woodland with an alternative route. So again, this is not an unavoidable route, and therefore we could mitigate the impact of going through ancient woodland by looking at alternative options. I think that this would be an act of environmental vandalism to remove the ancient woodland that's there. I also agree with the points that have been made around the impact on protected and endangered species, and think that policy 38 and policy 41 are not fully met. I'm disappointed that again SEPA and Nature Scotland and some of the other statutory bodies don't seem to be doing their job in protecting these environmental considerations. But I think for those reasons, in particular the health implications, the planning implications of the route, and indeed the environmental considerations, I'd like to move refusal, but happy to clarify the specific points of policy with the legal officers should that be required.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. Councillor Barnacle, you wish to second.
Thanks, Convener. I'd like to wholeheartedly support Councillor Purvis in his summary of why we should refuse this application at this time, because of a viable alternative, I would suggest, to be looked at again. And I wonder if he would add in the effect on the green belt and policy 43 as another reason to consider in his amendment. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Purvis, is that something you want added?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to agree that. I don't know whether you want to have that discussion with Jeff Fogg now or leave that till the
Well,
end.
I would like to just make one sort of clarification at the moment, if we could, first and foremost, because it now looks like we're going to a vote. Could I ask Chris, please, from the IT's perspective, did you see any reason that, or at any point that Councillor Wilson may have dropped out of the meeting? He is adamant himself, and it is down to himself that he heard all of it, but I just want clarification before we proceed that Councillor Wilson was connected, as far as we can see, all the way through.
Yes, afternoon, convener. There's nothing untoward that we could see at this end, and we're continuing to monitor. So there was nothing untoward that we could see.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. So I just wanted to make sure that we had that clarification. Mr. Fogg, before I go to the point of my chance to sum up, which I'll take obviously, but do you want to have clarification from Councillor Purvis regarding his points for the amendment?
Convener, just very briefly first, would it be possible to do this by way of a recess? I know that we had concerns raised at some of the previous meetings that it was quite a long process, and more than happy to go through in detail with Mr. Fogg on that, but I don't think it's particularly conducive to do that in the public forum, if it were.
I am happy to do that. My concern is, as we've had before, if people keep all leaving, then we could have an issue. I would like all councillors, please, other than Councillor Purvis, who's putting forward the amendment, to get in touch with Mr. Fogg. But if the other councillors could actually stay in this meeting, that would be preferable. Councillor Purvis, if you could nip out and maybe contact Mr. Fogg, that would maybe work that way.
Thank you.
Okay, I know that Councillor Purvis has removed, and hopefully he'll be speaking to Mr. Fogg presently. So that would then mean that to the rest of us, if we could go into a short recess. If you could stay online, and please accept that this is still live, so make sure that you are muted, and if you want to switch your camera off, that would be fine. I know there's a point of order coming in, but I want to make sure that we don't take too long. It's very difficult in these circumstances. So I would really like to be back and going, say, maximum 10 minutes. Your point of order, Councillor Waters.
Should Councillor Barnacle not be joining Councillor Purvis and the legal team?
My understanding was it was the amendment that was put forward, that it was the councillor that put the amendment forward rather than both, but I'm happy to take advice on that. Officers, could you let me know whether it should be both?
Surely.
Are we reconvening at 1:15, convener?
Yes, 1:15. Councillor Barnacle, I've had a message that maybe the question is whether you can actually get access to the discussion. Will be interesting, but I will leave that up to yourself. Technically, you should be involved in that. So if you would like to try and get in contact with Councillor Purvis and Mr. Fogg offline. There is also a request there that Chris will assist with that. So if you could, Chris, if you could get in touch with Councillor Barnacle and try and bring that together, that would be helpful. And to the rest of the committee, 1:15, we will reconvene. Thank you.
Convener, both Jeff and I are back. We did try to invite Councillor Barnacle into our call a couple of times, but we didn't seem to be able to do that successfully.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Purvis, for that. But are you, Councillor Barnacle, are you aware of it, or are you happy with the structure of the amendment?
Convener, I was available on my landline, but didn't get a call. But I'm confident that Councillor Purvis and Jeff Fogg will reach a position that I can support.
Okay, thank you for that. We are slightly early. I don't know if that then means that some councillors have maybe taken a comfort break or whatever. So I will be happy to wait the extra 2 minutes. I said a 1:15. I'm happy to wait for that so that we can then make sure that everybody is back on. And Danny will do another roll call, and then I will open it up for any other comments. So we'll wait the extra couple of minutes if that's okay. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I make that 1:15. Danny, could we possibly have another roll call just to make sure that all councillors are back on, and then we will proceed with comments.
Yeah, absolutely, Convener. So again, members, you just let me know whether you're in the meeting. Councillor Anderson. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Anderson, I couldn't hear that. I think you might have been on mute.
Yes, having problem with unmuting. I don't know if I'm muted or not now. Present.
We've got you now, Councillor Anderson, so that's great. Councillor Barnacle.
Present.
Councillor Braun.
Present.
Councillor Drysdale.
Present.
Councillor Gray.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
Councillor James.
Present.
Convener, we've heard from yourself. Councillor Purvis.
Present. Sorry, didn't unmute myself.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
Councillor Waters.
Present.
Councillor Williamson.
Present.
And Councillor Wilson.
Present.
Thank you. I think that's everyone back, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so I'll open it up to any comments from the committee. Is there anyone wishing to make a comment? And if so, could they put the C in the meeting chat box now?
My chat doesn't seem to be working. I don't know.
Okay, would you like to make a comment, Councillor Drysdale?
Thank you very much, Convener. I appreciate that. What I'd like to say is that using current vocabulary, the Cross-Tay Link Road might well be described as a circuit breaker, allowing vitally important transport and infrastructure improvements to be undertaken when traffic volumes have been reduced in Perth city centre. recent history of urban and infrastructure development is littered with examples where such opportunities have not been taken by city councils and other local authorities. In my view, it would be inexcusable if this local authority were to fail to make the most of this window of opportunity to prioritise active travel projects, introduce and encourage environmentally friendly public transport, and take other measures for the benefit of this and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. Councillor Reid, you have a comment.
Thank you, Convener. The unacceptable level of air pollution in the Bridgend, Athol Street area of Perth has been highlighted by Friends of the Earth and many others. I agree with Dr. Walker, previously of NHS Tayside, that the only way this level of pollution can be reduced is by significantly reducing traffic volume through the Bridgend corridor. And this can only be done by building the link road in association with improvements and significant improvements at Inverarmond and Broxton roundabouts. I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener, and I'm sorry that I'm like others. The comment box has sometimes been failed to send. However, I'm here now. This is a big decision, and it's not lightly made as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure that applies to others. I've only reached a decision on this after a fair amount of consideration, some semi-sleepless nights, and also an awful lot of thought and discussion. One of the things, Convener, that made me help make up my mind when I was researching for this discussion today was an Ordnance Survey map of 1969, which I wanted to look at in relation to the Stormont Field Road. And I've got to say I'm still very uncomfortable about the proposal about stopping up Stormont Field Road, and intend to, with others, and perhaps Councillor Gray may want to contribute on this, consider that as a matter that we should really take separately. But I realise it's part and part of the parcel on the paper, and we've got to accept that. But that map didn't have the Friarton Bridge on it. It didn't have the Western Bypass in Perth, which I look out the window and see the traffic passing a few hundred metres from my home. Didn't have Broxton and didn't have Inverarmond. And imagine what we'd look like as a town, a city, if these projects hadn't gone ahead. I think the CTLR is of that magnitude. I don't think it solves all the problems. It certainly doesn't for places like Burlton and Balbeggie, but I think it offers an opportunity for the Scone community and other communities in Strathmore to have a different type of future. There's been a lot said about pollution and the detailed technical aspects of that, but Scone, as it is at the moment, suffers from pollution in its main street to a considerable degree, to hundreds of houses, I would suggest. And there is very little mitigation or control we can take over that at present. However, by providing a sensible and safe option for travel, for traffic from the Blairgowrie and Forfar directions, we can have a route that includes mitigation measures in it. There is a problem, as was alluded to by my colleague just who spoke a moment ago, that there's pollution at Bridgend. There's also one major issue, is that there will be a big push for hybrid and electric cars, Convener, in the future. And in relation to the countryside aspect of the housing site that's in the middle of the road, whether the road's in the middle of the housing or the other way around is a matter of debate. But the fact that there's open countryside aspect to that will help in mitigation measures going forward. I've never been enthusiastic about the CTLR. I've always been critical of it, but I think on balance, I'll go with the motion today and support the proposal that we proceed.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Braun, your comments.
Thank you, convener. This is a very important decision for this committee to make today. It's an important piece of infrastructure for Perth and its surrounds. Inevitably, something like this is going to affect the environment, no matter how you try and mitigate it. And you have to get a balance between the effect on the environment and the future of Perth and its environmental surrounds, the people who live there and work there. One thing we didn't mention in the debate or in the questions was the fact that the carbon cost of construction has been reduced by utilising PS 2080, which will reduce carbon reduction by 21% from the original design. So I think that's worth noting. And the other thing I'd just like to point out, which my colleague Councillor James has touched on, was the need for housing. Much housing is dependent upon this road, and I think from memory some 7,000 homes are dependent upon this construction, of which 1,800 are affordable housing, and that affordable housing is much needed in this area. That really concludes my comments, convener. I'm going to be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Braun. Next comments are from Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I support the motion. I feel that this CTLR road project is long overdue. Ever since I lived in Perth area, the topic by drivers has always been centred around a bridge north of Perth. I do take on board the issues around pollution with surrounding the new road, but it is in our hands to ensure that housing and any other development is protected by buffers, etc. I would also say I do have concerns about not only Stormontfield but the other road infrastructure surrounding the CTLR, and hope that we can look at ensuring that the minimum amount of disruption and people having to travel additional mileage to get to shops, etc., is looked at carefully and addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, convener. Yes, well, Councillor Anderson, I'll just address it right now. For some time throughout the proceedings, I've been studying a map here, and I've figured out that from the Stormontfield Road roundabout to the Highfield roundabout, taking that route to get to the centre of Scone would be considerably less than taking the Stormont Road roundabout up to the next roundabout, the A93, and back down again. The shortest route is to go to the Highfield roundabout and into town. So therefore that point is now behind me, and I'm sorry about my scepticism on it in the first place. Other than that, I'm delighted to think that this CTLR will now proceed from this point on, simply because it's been on the drawing board for throughout all my time in the council, through TAPLAN and now through our development plans. And I'm very happy to see it at this stage, and I look forward to seeing it agreed today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Gray. I'm just getting a little bit of legal advice, just because, just on standing orders, just because as Councillor Barnacle has seconded the amendment, I'm just wanting to get a little bit of what standing orders are to make sure that we follow it correctly. So bear with me a wee second while I catch up with that. Okay, it seems from the information that I'm getting, and if somebody would like to sort of verbally come in, because I'm not following the 2 or 3 comments, but from the information I'm getting, it's not normal to allow an additional comment after somebody has either put forward a motion, an amendment, or a seconding. Am I right in that analysis, or am I completely wrong, Danny?
No, convener, that's correct. Standing Order 49 state no member shall speak more than once, except when raising a point of order, making a point of clarification, moving or seconding a procedural motion in a debate on any one motion or amendment.
Okay.
So my interpretation of that would be, as Councillor Barnacle has seconded the amendment, that would preclude him from making further comment.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification, and apologies, Councillor Barnacle, but that is the standing orders, so we are following them to the letter at the moment, so thank you. Okay, as there are no further comments, I would like to ask Mr. Fogg to address the committee so that the full committee is aware of the information and advice given to Councillor Purvis regarding the amendment. Mr. Fogg, if you would do that, please.
Yes, convener. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to Councillor Purvis. It's unfortunate Councillor Barnacle couldn't join us, but I noted he was confident that Councillor Purvis would have properly represented his position, particularly given Councillor Purvis's willingness to incorporate the Green Belt policy of which he was founding. So that leaves a situation where, as I understand Councillor Purvis, he's advancing 5 separate policy reasons from the local development plan as the basis for his amendment to refuse the application, together with a, if I can call it, a catch-up reason that founds on the position being taken by NHS Tayside. What I said to Councillor Purvis is that I'm accepting that on balance these are competent, just, but were I to be faced in an appeal situation, I would have serious reservations about my ability to avoid an award of expenses, having regard to the reasonableness of some of these reasons for refusal. For example, it seems to me that most are being taken contrary to the expert advice that's been made available to the committee as set out in the report and as amplified in answers given this morning. For example, although he founds on air quality, the information that the committee has is that the predicted levels will be at 25% only of WHO guidelines when compared to the current exceedance or near exceedance that we have in Perth city centre. That the route chosen, which is his primary reason for moving the amendment to refuse, was described as being the optimum one chosen in close consultation with the statutory consultees, none of whom objected to this alignment during the LDP1 or LDP2, nor indeed have they objected to this application. And similar position pertains both in relation to the encroachment into Greenbelt and the biodiversity and habitats policies on which he founds. However, I'm stopping short of I am accepting that they're competent, but I felt obliged to give him the reservations that I have, and I think it's only appropriate that I shared them with the committee. That was advice. I felt in the interest of transparency it was appropriate that the rest of the committee had the same opportunity as he had for me to articulate it. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Mr. Fogg. Okay, as we've just had that information and we're going to proceed, I've just would like to give Councillor Barnacle, because it became apparent in that bit there that he didn't get a chance to get into the discussion when that was going through. So I'm going to try and be fair and give Councillor Barnacle the opportunity to add to the amendment if he wants to, or add anything to that. If not, then we will proceed. But he wasn't in the room, so I'm trying to make sure that we are covering all bases. Councillor Barnacle, is there anything you wish to add to the amendment, not as in a comment?
I don't think so. I felt it was slightly unfortunate that I couldn't have a comment in following what other people had said, but if standing orders don't allow me to, then maybe we should be looking at that, because it was a very short second of the amendment, which didn't allow me to expand on, you know, my position, basically.
Well, my apologies for that. As I say, we are following standing orders to as precisely as possible. I think it's important to do that anyway, but it's really doubly important when we're looking at a contentious issue. So I understand your disappointment, but as I say, we are following that. Okay, then we now move to the stage where I sum up as the mover. Councillor Purvis and Barnacle are entitled to their opinion, absolutely, and I respect their view, but I cannot agree. It's always been a concern of mine as a convener that when we're assessing an application, we assume we're in a position based on the information that we're given. And sometimes that assumption then means that we think an alternative is better, but we don't have the detailed information pertaining to that alternative. We have no way of knowing that the subsequent issues that could come forward if that was assessed. So to base a decision on something we have no information on, or on something that we assume will be better, is the reason why that we have to assess the application before us, and not one that we think might be better, because we're not in the position and we don't have the subsequent training to be able to make that decision and that ruling. So as much as I understand where Councillor Barnacle and Purvis are coming from, we have an application in front of us, and that has been fully assessed, and it has been taken as the optimum route, taking into consideration absolutely everything. Ancient woodland, the correct way to go, Roman camp, various other artifacts and history, and we have the optimum route in front of us. This route has been assessed, and I've already mentioned this, in the local development plan process, both in the previous one and the current one. It's been assessed by the reporter and it has been accepted at every stage. It is not contrary to, but it is in accordance with the development plan, and that is what we are here to do. We have listened to both sides, we have questioned, we have taken into consideration the concern of a road going through a development area. But we have that road going through a development area on the other side of town that was perfectly acceptable and is perfectly acceptable and has been agreed and is wanted. We have to look at the application in front of us, and in doing so, I see no reason to not approve this application. So I am proposing that we approve it and proceed with getting this long-term project moving forward. Thank you. We now put this over to a vote. So, Danny, could I pass it over to you for a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Convener. I'm actually just going to pass over to Mr. Fogg first, just to summarise the motions and amendments.
Of course, well done. Thank you for picking me up on that. Mr. Fogg, if you could please just reassess where we are with the motion and amendment, and then we'll go to the vote. Thank you.
Yes, Convener, the motion is your own, which is to approve the application in accordance with the recommendation of the Head of Planning and Development in the report of handling, and your motion is seconded by Councillor James. There is one amendment, and that is advanced by Councillor Purvis, and that amendment is seconded by Councillor Barnacle. I have the amendment being as follows: that the application should be refused on the grounds that it contravenes 5 policies of the local development plan, number 2, specifically that it is in view of the alignment at the eastern end, contrary to policies 1A and B on placemaking, that it's contrary to policy 38 in relation to environment and conservation, having regard to habitat, species considerations, that it contravenes policy 41 on biodiversity, policy 43 because of the extent of encroachment into the green belt, and policy 56 in relation to noise pollution, and 57 in relation to air quality, and further that it fails to give due cognizance to the representation received from NHS Tayside. And that I think I've agreed with both Councillors Purvis and Councillor Barnacle. I'll therefore pass back to my colleague Mr. Williams, who will take the roll call vote.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Fogg. So members, if you can let me know whether you'll be voting in favour of the motion or the amendment just when I call your name out. So, Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Barnacle.
Amendment.
Councillor Braun.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale.
Motion.
Councillor Gray.
Motion.
Councillor Illingworth.
Motion.
Councillor James.
Sorry, couldn't unmute. Motion.
Thank you. Councillor McCall.
Motion.
Councillor Purvis.
Amendment.
Councillor Reid.
Motion.
Councillor Waters.
Motion.
Councillor Williamson.
Motion.
And Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
I'd just like to confer with Mr. Falke. Jeff, I have that down as 11 votes in favour of the motion and 2 in favour of the amendment. Do you agree?
I have the same count, Danny, yes.
Thank you very much. So therefore, as I say, that was 11 votes in favour of the motion and 2 in favour of the amendment. So therefore, the motion will carry.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And councillors, thank you very much indeed. It is 20 to 2. And with other than a couple of short recesses, we have gone through this application, we have listened, we have questioned, and it has been, in my opinion, a very robust application, and it has been put through its paces. So I appreciate everybody's attention, everybody's time. We have certainly done that with both applications that have come through to us today, so it is very much appreciated, and thank you very much indeed.